Happy 4th of July weekend, everyone. And last night, President Donald Trump started the Independence Day celebration by signing the One Big Beautiful Bill. You know, when he started talking about the Big Beautiful Bill and the fact that he was going to consolidate all of the spending into one big bill, and he was going to pass it by the 4th of July holiday, I was skeptical. I thought, well, that's just too ambitious. And to get the United States Congress to do something that magnanimous in that short a period of time is really optimistic. Like so many things Trump, he flat out pulled it off. It was almost like watching a magic act in real time. And he did it. So the House passed their version. They sent it to the Senate. The Senate could not come to a complete consensus. Well, there was no consensus at all between Republicans and Democrats. The Senate voted 50-50 for and against the bill, with Senators Rand Paul and Tom Tillis casting votes, negative votes for the bill. I started to say cast their votes with the Democrats, but they didn't cast their votes with the Democrats. It really irritates me when the mainstream media says that kind of garbage. They didn't cast their vote with the Democrats. They just happened, the Democrats and Rand Paul and Tom Tillis voted against the bill, but for completely different reasons. Well, sort of. Rand Paul voted against it because he has consistently been a fiscal conservative, just like his father, Ron Paul, who served with distinction in the United States House of Representatives for decades. Then Rand Paul came on the scene, and he became the senator from Kentucky, and he continued his father's mantra of less spending, less government. I love him. I love his dad too. I love their policies. And Rand Paul, who I've met 2 or 3 times, is a very down-to-earth, nice person, level-headed, and he has a good relationship with Trump. So he was able to vote against the bill, but not incur Trump's wrath. Meanwhile, Tom Tillis voted against the bill, and he was very clear that he was voting against it because he did not like the cuts to Medicaid, because that would go against his constituents, many of his constituents in North Carolina. He's in somewhat of a competitive seat, and the politics of that aggravated Trump and said it's time for Tillis to go. Tillis said, okay, no problem. I won't run for re-election. Well, that kind of opens the door for a number of people, including Trump's daughter-in-law, who was going to run for the Senate 4 or 6 years ago, and then decided not to. But we'll see how that turns out. But the point that I'm trying to drive at is that Trump gave Rand Paul a bye for voting against the bill, and then he scolds Tom Tillis for voting against the bill. So it's hard to reconcile those two. Well, it's no different than what happened in the House. Here's Speaker Mike Johnson announcing the vote in the House.
Thank you. This is the vote tally card. We're going to frame this one, okay? 218, 214. Listen, I'm not going to give you a long speech. A lot has been said today, and these people are exhausted. A couple of us quite literally haven't slept in 2 days, so I'm a danger to myself and others right now. I'm not going to speak off the cuff. I'll just say this. I mean, many of you have asked me this question in the hall over the last couple of days. But when it looked like that we might actually deliver this thing, particularly this morning, how did you know? I mean, what kept you going? Why did you think this was possible? You guys made an audacious plan. You brought the most comprehensive, complicated piece of legislation, probably, arguably in the top 2 or 3 in the history of the Congress, with the smallest margin in U.S. history, which we had for a big chunk of the first 100 days. And you put this audacious timeline. You said you were going to pass it out of the House by Memorial Day. I mean, some of you openly laughed at me when I said that back in early February. And then we said we would get it done by July 4th. We beat Memorial Day by 4 days, and we got this one done a day early. I just want to point out, okay?
Schedule and under budget.
So the question was, I mean, well, like, why? Why did you do that? Why did you think that was possible? Because it sums up. I would sum it up with one word. It's belief. Okay, we had a vision for what we wanted to do as a group. We believed in the election cycle last fall that we were going to be given this great blessing of unified government, that we would have the White House and the Senate and the House aligned, in alignment, unified government. And we did not want to waste that opportunity because we understand the history that comes along with it, the opportunity that we can do for the country, and we believe that we would have that chance. And then I believe in the people that are standing here behind me. I believe in this group, every single one of them individually. Some of them are more fun to deal with than others, you know. I mean that with the greatest level of respect. I love every single one of my colleagues. Even the ones I got to spend the more time with, right? Because everybody's here, their motive is right, their heart is right. They're trying to do right for their constituents. They're trying to serve the greatest nation in the history of the world that we're going to celebrate tomorrow. We don't take that lightly. I know their hearts, and I know what their skill sets are, and I know what they bring to the table, and I get up every day excited because I know that each of them are going to bring that to the table, and they're going to serve their constituents. You could not have a greater group of public servants than the people standing in this room right here. They will give their all for this country. And man, that's what the framers intended when they put this thing together 249 years ago. This is what it was about. So I believed in this vision. I believed in the group. I believe in America. I believe we have the greatest nation. I'm going to say this very simply, and everybody here would articulate it in their own way. We had a tough 4 years before this last election cycle. America we were in deep trouble. And we knew that if we won, and we believed we would, we knew that if we got unified government, we'd have to quite literally fix every area of public policy. Everything was an absolute disaster under the Biden-Harris radical, woke, progressive Democrat regime. And we took the best effort that we could in one big, beautiful bill to fix as much of it as we could. And I am so grateful to God that we got that done as we did. Because of the dedication, yeah.
In the House, predictably, Thomas Massey, also from Kentucky, interestingly, he basically opposes everything Trump. He's just become a gadfly. And so Trump really does not like Massey. And Trump vowed to primary Massey in the next election next year. But hang on, Massey has a secret weapon. Oh, yeah, that would be Elon Musk, who has pledged to fund or help fund Massey's reelection campaign. Brian Fitzpatrick also voted against the bill. He is a Republican from Pennsylvania's 1st congressional district, and he voted against the bill because of cuts to Medicaid. So when I say the Republicans didn't vote with the Democrats, well, they sort of did in the case of Tillis and Fitzpatrick. Now, for some reason, Trump hadn't gone after Fitzpatrick, even though he voted against it for the same reasons that Tillis rather did. So it may just come down to a personal relationship like the one that he has with Rand Paul. I don't know what Fitzpatrick's relationship is to the president, but regardless, the bill passed. It passed by a decent margin in the House, 218 to 14. Had Massey and Fitzpatrick gone along with the president and the Republicans, the margin would have looked even a lot better. So what's all the rancor about? Well, the Democrats are really upset that the bill has the effect of paring back Medicaid. In fact, it will reduce Medicaid expense by $1 trillion over the next 10 years. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office. So the bill requires that recipients of Medicaid show proof of income twice a year. Now, they can do that with a paycheck stub, or they can fill out a personal financial statement, or show whatever proof they can. And then they also have to proof of citizenship. I like that one. Not because I'm not compassionate, but because we cannot afford to take care of the world. That's just a fact of life. We just cannot do it. And so people who came here illegally should not be able to come here and accept our safety nets like Medicaid, given the fact that they are illegal and did not enter the country or obtain citizenship. The bill also requires Medicaid recipients to work 20 hours a week, or be in school 20 hours a week, or give community service 20 hours a week. What's the matter with that? Able-bodied, capable people should not be able to sit at home, watch TV, and collect welfare, which is what Medicaid is. And we've got to tame the welfare system in this country. There is just no question about it. And otherwise, we're going to go bankrupt. People have this notion that the welfare and transfer payments are untouchable, but we've got to change our thinking on that. We've got to tame the welfare state in America if we are going to do anything about spending. Well, just hours before the big, beautiful bill, as Trump labeled it, that everyone has adopted the nomenclature on, Elon Musk resurfaced and said that he was going to start a third party and he would actively campaign and help fund opponents for anyone who ran on a platform of fiscal conservativeness and then voted for this bill. I mean, the bill has $3.5 trillion in additional cost to the American people over the next 10 years. And Musk is really upset about that. Guess what? So am I. But I look at it a little bit differently than Elon does. But let's go back and look at Musk and Trump's past. Musk really ruffled the president's feathers by opposing the big, beautiful bill, especially in the second war of words that they engaged in that escalated just this past week, with culminating with Trump even hinting, suggesting that he would be open to looking at the possibility of deporting Elon Musk. Now, I can kind of see both sides on this debate, but I'm sorry, Mr. President, that goes too far. That is nothing but petty. We don't live in a fascist state. And I agree that you're not an emperor. You have no right, in my view, to even infer that you would do something like that. And the fact of the matter is, it does not reflect positively on the President of the United States, in my opinion. Trump was happy to receive Elon's $250 million towards his campaign. He was happy to receive Elon's month-long campaigning in Pennsylvania, which the president won by a wide margin. He doesn't acknowledge that Musk contributed towards that. In fact, he says just the opposite. That reeks of ingratitude. And our listeners know that I just call balls and strikes. And you also know that I am a Trump loyalist to the end. But that does not constitute me having to bite my tongue, swallow the truth, and not be able to talk about it. And I'm just telling you, I love Trump. So does Trump, by the way. But I do. I think he is phenomenal. He is smart. He is a street fighter. He is savvy. And he's got all the qualities. He's brilliant and rich, as he'll also share with you. But he's got a pettiness to his personality, and most of all, a lack of gratitude. You are his friend when you have something to offer him. When you don't, you're yesterday's news. So let's look at Trump and Musk history for a bit. Now, Musk, a few months ago in a 60 Minutes interview with Trump, when they were talking about Doge, had these words to say about the president.
Well, I love the president. I just want to be clear about that.
I don't care about that.
I know. I love the president.
You love the president.
I think President Trump is a good man, and he's, you know.
It's nice the way he said that. You know, there's something nice about it.
Really is.
It is.
You know, because I mean, the president's been so unfairly attacked in the media. It's really outrageous. And I've at this point spent a lot of time with the president, and not once have I seen him do something that was mean or cruel or wrong. Not once.
And then, not too long ago, President Trump had these words to say about Elon Musk. Roll tape.
He has never asked me for a favor. He didn't ask me for this. I said, you know, Elon, I don't like what's happening to you. And Tesla's a great company. I don't like what's happening. It's, from our standpoint, American cars, American made. He employs thousands of people. He's got, at the same time, he has the most modern plants in the world. I said, I don't like what's happened to you. I'm going to do it. I didn't even know he was going to come. He's never asked me for anything. He endorsed me, and he never asked me. I didn't even know he was going to endorse me. The guy has never asked me. He's not saying, in fact, I could go a step further. I ended the electric mandate. Okay, I ended the electric mandate. And I figured, when's this guy calling to raise hell with me? And he never called. I mean, he never called me. If I were him, I would have called.
So on that,
because he's probably even better than I am.
Mr. President.
Now, I have been following Elon Musk for the better part of 7 years, maybe 8. Every day of my life, I spend an hour studying, researching, and staying current on the latest with Tesla, the Optimus robot, the autonomous car, SpaceX, the Boring Company, Neuralink, which has the potential to restore fine motor activity for people who have been stricken with paralysis or have suffered some sort of debilitating injury. And this invention of a microchip that can be placed at the top of the spinal column or somewhere proximate to one's brain can help restore sight, hearing, and fine motor skills, so people can resume and regain their dexterity if they lost it in a horrible accident. So I am just wild with excitement over everything that Elon Musk is doing. Did I mention SpaceX? I mean, and what about Solar City and the power component, the electrical power, the division of Tesla? I mean, it's just unbelievable and mind-blowing to me. And I'm very excited about the future with Elon Musk inventions. Well, so was Trump until Musk made the unfortunate decision for him to oppose the big, beautiful bill. Now they're at each other's throats. Well, initially, Musk was at Trump's throat. He was hurling insults and even went so far as to say that the Epstein files hadn't been released because they would reflect badly on Trump, that he was friends with Epstein and that there's damaging information in those files. I don't know whether that's true or not, but Musk said that. So they've definitely both burned the bridge from both sides of the canal, so to speak. And but the point I was trying to get to, I'm sorry, I got off track there for a moment. The point I was trying to get to is that I've been watching Musk for 8 years, and I have heard him consistently and repetitively say that he did not favor tax credits for his electric car or any other manufacturers. Here, watch along with me.
We don't need the $7,500 tax credit. I would say, honestly, I would just can this whole bill. Don't pass it. That's my recommendation.
What about the support though for the charging network? I mean, there are parts of this bill and no.
No, I mean, do we need support for gas stations? We don't. So there's no need for this for support for a charging network. I would delete it. Delete.
So there you have it. Musk has consistently said that he doesn't think that the government should give tax credits or subsidies for electric vehicles. Why does he say that, do you suppose? Does he not like free money? Well, it goes deeper than that. It goes beyond that. If you want to look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, Tesla is so far ahead of all the other manufacturers on electric cars and so much more profitable. I mean, it is genius what they've done. Ford, Stellantis, General Motors, they're having a hard time catching up. They lose money every time they sell an electric vehicle. So the subsidies are very important to them and other automakers that make cars in the United States or sell electric cars here. So you could argue that it is a competitive advantage for Tesla not to get the EV credits. And Musk has said all along, I don't want the credits, but if I'm not going to get them, nobody should get them. And so now Trump is trying to change the narrative, and he is saying that Musk has turned against the big, beautiful bill because of the elimination of the EV tax credits. Here he is.
I don't know. I think we'll have to take a look. We might have to put Doge on Elon. You know what Doge is? Doge is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Wouldn't that be terrible? He gets a lot of subsidies, Peter. But Elon's very upset that the EV mandate is going to be terminated. And you know what? When you look at it, not everybody wants an electric car. I don't want an electric car. I want to have maybe gasoline, maybe electric, maybe a hybrid, maybe someday a hydrogen. If you have a hydrogen car, it has one problem. It blows up, So I'm going to give that one to Peter.
So which is it, Mr. President? Has he never asked you for anything, or has he let you know that he wanted the tax credits, maybe behind closed doors? That seems to be what you're inferring, but I happen to know that Musk has consistently, repeatedly, never wavered on not thinking that the tax credits were a good idea. Period, paragraph, hard stop. So for one time, I don't think Donald Trump is being honest with us. That's right. I don't think he's being honest with us. For him to say that Musk is mad and is about the EV tax credits, and that's why he's opposing the big, beautiful bill, I think is just a complete, utter fib. I don't think there's any factual basis for that. And frankly, I'm offended by it. But let's get back to the point, the big, beautiful bill. And as have said, it's nuanced and it's difficult for a lot of people to understand, evidently even for Elon Musk to understand. But this is my belief as a student and of politics and government and doing deep dives on this stuff every day. My belief is that Trump is going to try and cure the deficit by increasing revenues. And I think that he is going to increase revenues, not by increasing taxes. He may increase tax revenue, but it will be because of an expanding market, an expanding gross domestic product. Now, that's a lofty ambition and it's a big gamble. So if he pulls it off, he is going to be the hero of the century. If he doesn't pull it off, we're going to have hell to pay. But my other suspicion, and I think Trump has telegraphed it to us on occasion, he has as much as said, we've got to get the 2017 tax cuts codified. We've got to pass into law the reduction in income taxes on certain individuals like servers, no tax on tips, seniors, no tax on Social Security, and workers, no tax on overtime. So I think those are all very good policy achievements. But how are you going to pay for it? That's what Musk is upset about. Where is the fiscal discipline that you promised us, Donald Trump, when you were running for president? Now you have the opportunity to deliver, and you haven't. But you see, Trump has a long game plan, I believe. So in Trump's mind, he's got to get this bill passed first, get relief from the Fed on interest rates, get new revenues flowing into the Treasury from tariffs, reduce regulations on U.S. businesses, and allow $10 trillion of investment to come into the country, like Apple, for instance, which has pledged $500 to $600 billion of investment in new plants. $10 trillion, folks, that is significant. That is consequential. That is going to create jobs. It is going to create a larger output in this country. And then, meanwhile, we get out of the Ukraine, Israel, get Iran in check. We get the Ukraine and Russia war resolved. Our defense spending should then be able to come down. So I see where President Trump is headed, and I support him 100%. I trust him 100%. And a lot of what he is doing, I think, is just what he has to do to be able to get the legislation passed. Now, I do have an issue with his value system and his willingness to go after Musk, who has been his most loyal and largest contributor and campaigner. But I also fault Musk for going public with his disagreement. I'm sorry, Elon. I love you too, but the fact of the matter is, the people of the United States did not elect you president. Yes, you may have helped elect the president, but you did not become president. You have a seat at the table, but you should not have a megaphone unless you get to a point where you really can no longer support President Trump. And I don't believe that we have reached that point, because you just praised President Trump this week for his decisive actions on the world stage and his handling of the Israeli-Iran conflict, and his trying to make peace between Ukraine and Russia. And I think Trump's finding that to be harder than he expected. But he sure did put Iran in check in a hurry by dropping the big, beautiful bombs on Iran and taking out their nuclear capabilities, so we are told. So I just think that Elon should maybe take a breath, count to 10, Let's give the president an opportunity to get his policies enacted and to remake our U.S. economy. He needs your support. He wants your support. But I, too, will become disenchanted if Trump does not pretty quickly now get control of the federal budget and eliminate the deficits. That is something that we absolutely, positively, in my view, have to do. And Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Tillis, a whole host of Tea Party members of Congress believe that too. So we've given the president what he wanted on the big, beautiful bill. Now give us what we want in the succeeding months and curtail spending. I think we'll get there. Could be wrong, been wrong before, but let's see what happens. Now I got another bone to pick with the president. He made a big spectacle of going to South Florida this week to visit Alligator Alcatraz.
You know, snakes are fast, but alligators are, we're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay, if they escape prison.
U.S. President Donald Trump traveled to Florida Tuesday to inspect the site of a controversial new migrant detention center dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. Now, this remote facility is being reconfigured at a cost of $450 million U.S. to hold undocumented immigrants in the middle of the Everglades.
Is the model going forward, Mr. President?
It can be. I mean, you don't always have land so beautiful and so secure. We have a lot of bodyguards and a lot of cops that are in the form of alligators. You don't have to pay them so much. But I wouldn't want to run through the Everglades for long. It will keep people where they're supposed to be. This is a very important thing.
We've got very red states that should be doing this just as much as Florida's doing. That will increase their numbers. And then what happens is you'll have a lot of people that will deport on their own because they don't want to end up in an Alligator Alcatraz or some of those other places. So I think this is a model, but we need other states to step up.
The Florida Everglades to open America's newest migrant detention center. It's incredibly built, and you're seeing that yourself. That's why I said let the press join us on our walk so they can see what's happening. It's known as Alligator Alcatraz, which is very appropriate because I looked outside and it's not a place I want to go hiking anytime soon. But very soon this facility will house some of the most menacing migrants, some of the most vicious people on the planet. We're surrounded by miles of treacherous swampland, and the only way out is really deportation.
I don't know. I vehemently oppose what Biden did by opening the floodgates and allowing illegals into this country. And I passionately believe that we have got to send these people home. But it's not just that clear and simple, okay? And even Trump acknowledges that in saying that he is not going to go after farm workers, restaurant workers, and hotel workers. I would encourage you to add to that list construction workers. The fact of the matter is, every small business owner and every business that I go into has help wanted signs out. Now, the good news is that the unemployment rate fell in our country just this past week from 4.3 to 4.1%. So there is cause for optimism. But these jobs have got to be filled. And if you remove all of the illegal aliens in this country who are here living productive lives and not violating our laws and not engaging in criminality, then it has the potential to crush some small businesses that are now dependent on illegal people working in this country. Ergo, what I've proposed as the Gordon Plan. And I think that the Gordon Plan is starting to receive some recognition, and that people are starting to see the potential of the Gordon Plan. Look, Joe Biden, whether you like it or not, was president of this country for 4 years. Now, I've maintained consistently that he was illegitimate, and I blame the people that put him there and allowed him to become the illegitimate president. I blame the media for continually asserting the false narrative that Trump is asserting a false narrative that he lost the 2020 election. But it doesn't matter. That's in in the rearview mirror now. But what is a reality is that Joe Biden, as the president of the United States, opened the border and invited these people in. Okay? Now, was it right? No. But is it right to send them to Alligator Alcatraz? I mean, I've seen the pictures on the web. It's surrounded by tens of thousands of alligators. And I'm not worried about the alligators. I'm worried about I'm worried about the optics. It doesn't speak well. But you know, Trump is going after Bubba. He is doing what politicians do. He's going after Bubba. They're the gun-toting, gun-slinging, far-right conservative elements of the Republican Party that love this stuff. I'm a defender of the Second Amendment. Don't go there. I'm not talking about the Second Amendment. I'm just talking about appealing to our worst instincts. And that is putting these people who in their minds came here because they were allowed and to a large extent invited to. They were given housing and phones and daily stipends and food, all of which was wrong. But it's not their fault. It's not their fault that our government, like it or not, either participated in allowing them to come or enabled our elected officials to allow them to come. Like half of the Congress, the Democrats, they supported it. So punish them. But I don't think it's fair to punish the people that were invited into our country, albeit they came here illegally, but it wasn't illegal when our country's leadership invited them in. I think the people that invited them in should be punished. Where's the accountability for them? Why has Mayorkas not been put on the hot seat? Why is Merrick Garland not been subpoenaed and brought before Congress and investigated by Kash Patel and the FBI to find out what conspiracy was there, what collusion was there between the White House, his cabinet, the FBI, the ICE, the law enforcement people in America? Where was the collusion? Where was the effort to allow the borders to be open? Those are the people that should be held accountable. But I don't think sending invited guests to Alligator Alcatraz is the right solution. Why? Because I've got a heart. And that place is despicable. Do you know what it's like to be in South Florida in August and September? It is unbearable. It is 100+ degrees and the humidity is 100%. You cannot walk from the front door to your car without breaking out in a sweat. But rough, tough, macho man is rounding up the immigrants and sending them to Alligator Alcatraz so he can be the law and order president and appeal to the worst instincts of certain people in America who love that toughness. I love law and order. I also love fairness, and I despise injustice. So if we want to round up the illegals and send them home, I'm 100% in favor of it. But it's got to be done in a humanitarian method. And Alligator Alcatraz does not work for me. I think the people who celebrate that should be ashamed of themselves. So if you want to know something I don't like about Trump, you don't have to look past Alligator Alcatraz. I just think it's despicable that we would treat a human being in that manner. Now, big footnote. Big fat footnote. That does not apply to people who came to this country and have raped, murdered, and robbed. Send them straight to Alligator Alcatraz. Do not pass go. Do not collect $500. Go straight to jail. There has to be some modicum of due process. To receive that punishment, there has to be some modicum of due process. Look, this is a tough one. This whole thing is tough. Does someone who entered our country illegally, albeit invited, and then comes here and commits felonies, are they entitled to any compassion, any sensitivity from us? I don't really think so. But what about somebody who is swept up in the net, who is not guilty of those things and being sent to Alligator Alcatraz? I don't think it's just for felons. I think it's for any illegal. And I don't know what the protocols or the parameters are. Are they being sent there for life? Is that going to be their new home? Or is it a staging area for deportation? I think it's the latter, but we haven't really been told. So I'm sorry. I'm not feeling it. It feels inhumane to me for people who have come here with the best of intentions, who may have been working here illegally, albeit productively and crime-free. Those are the people that I'm worried about. They don't get a free pass. They don't get to stay here. But I do advocate the Gordon plan. And the Gordon plan is that we create ICE facilities all over America. Just go to the places where we had the vaccines distributed and make them intake facilities for illegals who are here and working and crime-free, who we can vet, who we can identify, make sure they get a government-issued ID and a Social Security number, and they become contributing members of our society. It should not be for all illegals. It should be for the number of illegals who we need to fill jobs. Migrant farm workers, harvesters, construction workers, hotel workers. I think Trump has quite a few resorts and hotels. Interesting. It's okay with me. It's okay with me because we need them. If we could find them within the confines of our country without illegals, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is our economy need them. What are the other exclusions? Hotel workers, farmers, and restaurant workers. I think Trump owns some restaurants too. So Trump feels the need himself. I'm not being disparaging. I'm really not. I'm saying that is a reality, and the fact that he can see the reality firsthand may give him a different view. He also is in the development business, the construction business. I don't know why he has not included those workers as well. But come up with the number that we need. Invite everybody in to register. And if you are vetted, you're working, you have not committed crimes, and there's any glue at all with our country, you've got relatives here, you've got children here, you've married here, any glue like that, you go to the front of the line. And then, I'm sorry, everybody else, you got to go home. You got to go home. But we're not going to deport you through Alligator frickin' Alcatraz. That really just does not sit well with me, folks. And I'm not too shy to tell you that. And I bet you a lot of people are going to disagree with me. Oh, you softy. You're starting to sound like a liberal, soft Democrat. All right, so be it. I'm not going to say what I think you want to hear. I'm going to say what I believe. And what I believe is that every single person who lives on this earth is God's child. And we need to love each other. And they may have made a mistake by coming here under false pretenses. They're not the problem. The people who invited them here are the problem. Punish them. Send them to damn Alligator Alcatraz, and I'll be down there to help hold the keys and open the door for them. They're the ones who need to be punished, but not the victims. The victims are the people who came here thinking they were going to be able to get a better life because the then President of the United States was encouraging it. That's my paradigm. Like it or lump it, I don't care. All right, the Georgia Republican Party. I've been quiet on this issue. I've given it a lot of thought. I'm going to make some people mad, but I think it is a case study in dysfunction. And I'll tell you why I've decided that. I think that being a member of the leadership of the Georgia Republican Party is probably a pretty tough job. I think you've got people that are gnawing at you, alligators chasing you. Yeah, we're back to alligators. But I think there are alligators, hoodlums, and people with agendas nipping at your heels every step of the way. So I think it's probably a pretty tough job. But it's a job you signed up for, you volunteered for, in fact, you campaigned for. If the heat's too hot, get the hell out of the kitchen. But I'm going to tell you flat out, the shenanigans that were done in Dalton, Georgia are flagrantly offensive to me. And Brant Frost IV, saying he would not apologize for being better at politics than the other people. They're the ones who went and created a human shield around the microphones. They appointed a chairman of the convention that did not follow Robert's rules of order. I haven't heard anybody, even the beneficiaries of their shenanigans, deny that they created a human shield around the microphones and did not allow people to voice their dissent. It was not an open convention. It was a rigged convention. It was fake. It was phony, and it was wrong. I've had personal experience with Josh McCoon. I quietly refer to him as Josh Buffoon. I'm sorry. I don't like the way that he is orchestrating this party. It is causing dissension. It is causing resentment. It is causing hostility. And it is not a free, fair process. If you're on the inside, you're golden. If you're on the outside, you're not. And I'm not speaking personally because, frankly, I don't really care. It does not have a direct impact on me. I am not ambitious. I aspire to nothing. I don't need Josh Buffoon. I don't need his circle of enablers, many of whom I know and many of whom I really like. And I wish they hadn't fallen victim to this. But it is not cool. It is not right. And you are running roughshod over the grassroots of the party who views things differently than you. And most of what you view is how you can stay in power. That's not the right value system, folks. It is not the right value system. There are rules, there's precedent, and there is opportunity for disagreement. But you denied that. You disenfranchised those people. And the sad part is you probably would have won anyway. Well, now you're about to face, I think, a stubborn dose of reality. It's my perception from a 30,000-foot view that the Georgia Republican Party is in a state of disarray, but I think it's going to get a lot worse because one of your main institutions has crumbled. That would be the Georgia Republican, the GRA. I've got the name wrong. The Georgia Republican Assembly, I think that's it. Who endorsed me? I got the largest endorsement from the GRA of any candidate in the 2022 cycle. Thank you. But I did it. I think I got it because I went there and I was genuine. I just told him who I was and what I believed. And I think it resonated. But there's all sorts of infighting there. It's spilling over into the Georgia Republican Party. And then you've got this silly ass issue over the Georgia Republican Party, Inc. Just fix it. Just fix it. Be real. Be transparent. And don't lie. People were told that, well, all the parties in Georgia are incorporated. Well, the Georgia Democratic Party turns out that it's not incorporated. And the political parties are created by statute in a separate section of the Georgia Code. This clinging to the Georgia Republican Party, Inc. is not consistent with Georgia statutory authority. But if you feel that you need some immunity, go to your friends at the state legislature and get them to change the law. Get them to legitimize what you have done or what was done in a process that no one seems to have fully understood or understand why we're digging our heels in so hard to maintain it. But then it removes and insulates the leadership from the statutory regulations that govern a political party. And to some extent, appears to disenfranchise members of the political party. But now one of your big funders is on the rocks. Georgia First Liberty, which is run by the Frost family, Brant Frost III and I attended the same high school together. I have known Brant, although not well, but I've known him over a period of 50 years. I like Brant. I don't know what happened. They had a good company. They've lost it. And now the Republican Party has lost a big funder. So is the GRA. And the signs of trouble are certainly more than just a little bit apparent. And I think that some real leadership is going to have to come forward. Somebody's going to have to come forward and restore integrity, transparency, openness to the process. And for those of you who view yourselves as part of the inner circle, I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but you have a duty. You have a duty to speak up. You have a duty to show your integrity and your backbone. Fix these things. Deal with the Georgia Republican Party, Inc. And stop the pettiness. You've got to stop the pettiness. What they did to Brian Pritchard, I think, is a disgrace. They were all for Brian Pritchard until they started criticizing them. Then they disenfranchised him and kicked him out of the leadership of the party. So I don't know. It's a mess. What is missing are honest brokers who will come to the table and say, the tent has got to be big enough for everyone. And this is not an autocrat run organization. It's got to be open, and you've got to allow yourself to be subject to criticism, and you've got to allow for a democratic process. If your ideas are right, then the assembly will vote you in. If your policies are wrong, then they will turn you out. That is a consequence you have to be willing to accept. But really, it's a pretty easy job. It's really a pretty easy job. The focus should be on raising money, recruiting good candidates, training good candidates, and supporting good candidates. That should be the role of the Georgia Republican Party, not this backroom, smoke-filled, dirty politics that I am absolutely fed up and sick of. It needs to stop. Somebody needs to come forward and be the one to say, stop it. No more. Deal with the grassroots. Deal with your constituencies. Deal with the problems and stop the petty politics. It is destroying and ruining our party, and it makes us look as bad as some of the Democrats. I'm sorry. I just don't like it. All right. Well, I've said my piece. I'm sure I made a lot of friends with that one. I don't care. You know what I care about? I care about the truth. That's all I really care about. And I do care about supporting Republicans because Republicans, I believe, and MAGA Republicans, we love the flag and we stand, salute, and respect it. We love God. We honor God's teachings and we live by the 10 Commandments. We believe in the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. And we believe in a fair, free, democratic process in order to sustain the republic that we would like to keep. We have to be better than the Democrats. And I know the temptations. I know the temptations. They are real. But you took a job, you accepted the role, and now you've got to deal with everything that comes with it. But you can't deal with it in back rooms, smoke-filled rooms, playing petty, dirty politics. All right, I'm repeating myself. We've got a great show for you. For those of you who are still listening and haven't turned off your radio in the great state of Georgia. And we come to you every Saturday from noon to 2 on the John Fredericks Radio and Media Network in Nashville, Atlanta, Richmond, Norfolk, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Morgantown. We also come to you by our friends at CDM Press. They have 13 digital platforms where they also try and speak the truth, report the news truthfully without spin, and they do a great job of doing so. We are honored that they will simulcast and take our feed and put it out over their network on the CDM Media Press. We also live stream to you every week on YouTube, Rumble, Getter, TikTok, X, and Facebook. See, Anthony, I got it even without your cheat sheet. In fact, you can watch us right now on Getter. We're coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia today, where I'm going to go out and start my car with a broomstick before I take my wife to lunch. And I'm sure we'll end up somewhere watching fireworks tonight. This episode of The Truth is brought to you by Perfect Circle Renewable Energy. They have been a restaurant services company in Atlanta for 15 years. They collect waste vegetable oil, service grease traps, do deep cleaning in the front of the house and the back of the house. Boy, they did a lot of that during COVID. If you're tired of spotty, messy, unreliable service, call PCRE Energy today. You can find them at www.pcrenergy.com. They're right there on the World Wide Web. They've got a 24-hour customer service line. They give great, locally owned, good, clean, reliable service. Perfect Circle Renewable Energy. Check them out. And we've got a very good program for you. Coming up today, we've got Tyler Gray. He was a member of the Delta Force. He was also an actor in Hollywood. We're going to get into it with him in just a minute. We're going to be talking about the world affairs and the clashes that are going on around the globe, how we can contain them and how we can ease them. Fred Galvin is also going to be on. He is going to talk about his experience having served our country faithfully. He and his platoon or group were ambushed. They defended themselves, and then they had to defend themselves in military courts because of a grave injustice that was brought upon them for, according to him, political purposes. I hate injustice. I despise it. He's got a great story to tell, and that's why I wanted to bring him on today. We're also going to speak with Steve Hankey. He is an economist. We're going to talk about the state of the economy in America today and where we're headed and how we're doing. These are compelling interviews, and I hope you will stay with us. I'm John Gordon, and I've told you the truth, and I'm going to continue to tell you the truth. Stay with us now for the rest of our show. And happy Independence Day weekend to all of our listeners. Skirmishes around the world abound. We have a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. We have a conflict between Israel and Iran that is being played out in both countries. And, of course, let us not forget the Ukraine, which is still very much involved in conflict with Russia. It seems sometimes that the whole world might be a powder keg ready to explode. I hope not. But it bears asking the question. Tyler Gray is a former Delta Force member and is here to help us figure out what in the world is going on in the world and how we achieve peace. Now, you may know Tyler better from his time as Trent Sawyer on the television episode SEAL Team. He served as both producer, director, writer, and an actor on that series that ran for 7 years on CBS. And you can now catch it on Paramount Plus. Tyler Gray, welcome to The Truth.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, do we need to worry about the Israeli-Iran war any longer now that Donald Trump dropped those big bad bombs in Iran on their presumed nuclear facilities?
The term worry, it's one of those things where at the end of the day, there's so many things, you said it at the beginning of your, when you started talking about, there's a lot going on in the world today. You got Ukraine, you've got, a ton of stuff that we're seeing with, for lack of a better term, what I'm calling the Cold War, or the lukewarm war with China. And I think the Iranian threat, for lack of a better term, and the conflict that's going on there, I don't think it's something that we should be as concerned about as, let's say the Chinese threat that's happening on our homeland right now. So, or even, you look at North Korean hackers, and there's constant, what I'm calling, there's constant infrastructure and business attacks and hacks and cyber attacks. Those are constant and, unrelenting. So I personally think those are more of a threat than really anything with Iran right now, especially after the, dropping the bombs on the nuclear facility. That being said, it is a concern and there's things to be aware of, but I don't think it's as pressing as those other issues, in my opinion.
President Trump says that we obliterated Iran's nuclear arsenal, particularly their uranium. If that's true, what happened to the uranium? When the bomb goes down 300 feet and explodes and there's uranium there, does it explode as well? I assume it's volatile.
So the way those bombs are designed and similar munitions like that, what they're really designed to do, and this is, the lay definition, but what they're designed to do is really collapse the structure. They're not designed as much to, fragment and blow it up as much as it's designed to kind of create this massive expansion and contraction, which will collapse the subterranean structure on itself. So my assumption is that any of the uranium there, whether it was enriched or not, was probably buried under itself. The uranium, I believe, is probably buried within the collapsed structure itself. That's what I believe.
Are there long-term consequences to that? Is that a dangerous condition?
In my opinion, highly, highly, highly more than likely. I don't I don't see how you could, drop that level of explosive on that type of structure and it not create some massive level of contamination. I don't see how that's possible. I could be wrong. That being said, I also fully believe that Iran, the Iranian regime, doesn't care at all. And I think they they did ironically after the Chernobyl. I believe the Iranian regime is going to send people in there to do what they're doing right now, which is with excavators and try and assess damage and start quote unquote cleanup. And I don't think they probably know how bad the potential contamination is or could be. And even if they do, I don't think they'll care for the crews working there.
I am so clueless on this subject. I have no insight at all, but just intuitively, I would think that if the uranium was breached or tampered with or exposed somehow and it's buried 200 or 300 feet underground, my instinct would be leave well enough alone and just let it sit there. And I don't know what the life is of uranium. I assume that there is some.
It's longer than our lives.
Yes.
So, to your point, I mean, I agree. Look, and let me clarify. Be taken the wrong way. I agree with you. I think with the facility collapsed on itself, even if there was, enriched uranium, highly more than likely the contamination would be relatively safe, in the sense that it's underground, it's buried. I mean, if you label it, cat, lack of a better term. So it's probably safe if they left it alone. But based on what they're doing right now, I don't think they're going to leave it alone. And if they start digging, I think it's going to open up the area and the people to some level of contamination. That's my expectation, but obviously...
I would assume that someone is monitoring radiation to determine whether there has been any leaks or not proximate to the bombing sites. So let me ask you, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. I voted for him. I've voted for him 3 times and have had the pleasure of spending time with him one-on-one. And I think he is the greatest president, was the greatest president of our lifetime in his first term. And I am hopeful that he will eclipse the accomplishments of Trump 1.0 in his second term. He's promised repeatedly that if elected, that he would end the Ukraine-Russian war on day one. We're now coming up on the 6th month, and is there any end in sight to the end of that war? Where over 1 million people, by the way, have died.
Yeah.
What a senseless loss of life. And do these leaders, I'm not talking about Trump, I'm talking about Putin and Zelensky, do they not have any regard for the dignity of human life? I mean, is it just ho-hum, another day at the office for them? I mean, I just don't know how they live with themselves, realizing that they have brought untold grief to a family multiplied times 1 million or more. How do you sleep at night? How do you look at yourself in the mirror? How do you live on the face of this earth? My conscience would not allow it.
Yeah, you got to think of it this way. I actually happened to be, and I won't tell the story because it's a long story, but I happened to be, I was a bodyguard after I got out of the military for almost 10 years. And I happened to be bodyguarding a very wealthy person. And I was at an event with, where George W. Bush was speaking, and it was very small, very elite. And Bush, this is, 10 years ago now. And Bush told a story about Putin. And I'll summarize it. It's actually hilarious. And Bush was like a stand-up comedian, which it was amazing to see. But anyways, the story was essentially that he had this dog, I think Buddy, I forget his name. And Putin comes to, wherever in the U.S., sees the dog, and Bush is like, yeah, that's my dog. And Putin was kind of like, that's your dog? He's like, yeah, it's my dog. And then it cuts to Bush goes to wherever in Russia, and he's at his Camp David. That's what I was trying to refer to. His the Putin Camp David, and these two massive dogs. I forget, it was some Russian breed, but these huge two Russian dogs come up, and Putin goes, "Those are my dogs, twice as big as Buddy." And Bush went, "That's Putin. That's just who he is. Like that's his character."
This is a radio show. We're governed by rules of the FCC, but I'm going to take a risk and just say, I've never met Putin, but that sounds to me like somebody with a very small penis that has to somehow build himself up through the size of his dog. That's bizarre.
And again, it was
What's
a much
the point of
longer.
that?
Yeah, it was a much longer, more funny story the way he told it. But the point of the story, I've always remembered that anytime Putin stuff comes up, I've always remembered Bush's, and that's his firsthand experience for years. And so I've always remembered that. And at the end of the day, that's who Putin is. You also have to remember that he was a KGB officer.
Yeah.
So
was George Bush's father.
Yes. But you look at Putin, I mean, Putin has the list of people he is straight up obviously assassinated that have questioned him or any of those things is long. I mean, a lot of people get thrown out of buildings, jump out of buildings that defy Putin. So you have to look
and commit
at
suicide with 2 bullets to the head.
Exactly. So, and again, partially you go, that's Putin. And to be fair to Putin, let's be honest, partially that's just kind of Russia, right? That it is what it is. That's, somewhat of a culture there. And so,
yeah, but Russia, I was surprised to learn, has a very large Christian population. And
the majority is,
I really
is Russia.
Take those 10 commandments very seriously. Thou shalt not kill. And I just don't think Putin has a very good prospect for his life in eternity.
To that point, I've had a friend that's been fighting in Ukraine now for, I think probably 2 years now since he got involved. And, I know a decent amount of more frontline stuff from him. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's shocking to me that it hasn't been solved. But, you're kind of in a position now where you've got two sides that are so committed, and their, quite frankly, reputation, not just of the country, but directly on the leaders is on the line, and neither wants to give. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a stalemate. No question, it's a stalemate. It should have never started. It should have ended long ago. It still hasn't ended. I think Trump is surprised. I think what he thought was going to happen, I think he's been a little surprised by the resistance to end it on both sides for reasons that are probably, again, a little bit of the leaders have to save face. I think that's why this hasn't ended.
Well, I have no knowledge, no direct evidence of this. I do think Putin is a different person today than he was 6 years ago when Trump engaged with him more regularly. I think that 2 thoughts come to mind. One is, I don't think we're blameless with the Ukraine-Russia war.
100% we're not.
We were going to bring Ukraine into NATO, and Putin interpreted that to mean that we were going to put nuclear arms on his border. That never worked well when Russia tried to do it. Soviet Union tried to do it to us in 1960, any differently than it's going to work for us now when we're the aggressor. So let's put that little factoid out there. And secondly, I think that Biden, the dumbass that he is and was as president, and I don't shy away from labeling him that way. People want to give him a pass because of his age and presumed senility. I give him a pass for nothing. I think he is a morally corrupt and defective person, and I think that he is corrupt to his very core. Now, having gotten that off my chest, I will just say that I think that as bad as he is, he's also stupid, because I think he drove Russia into the arms of China. And I think that could possibly explain why Putin is no longer seems to be reasonable in our eyes, because he has aligned himself with the world's second or third strongest empire, and he feels emboldened by that. That's just the world according to John. Who knows whether I'm right or not, but that I watch this stuff pretty closely and read and study it every day. That's sort of the perception I've got. What do you think?
Well, there's first of all, if you listen to longtime Russian expert or American experts on Russia, it's pretty obvious that look, I don't agree with the war in Ukraine. I don't agree with what happened. I don't agree with the death. I don't agree with it. That being said, from Putin's perspective, even though I don't feel that it was justified to do what he did, or I should more say, as a person who fought in 2 wars, I really don't agree he went about it specifically, but I do agree that it to a certain degree, what we were doing with Ukraine by flirting with them, being in NATO, and the things we were doing, it was a red line that he did establish. He said what he would do if that red line was crossed, and we and NATO were crossing that red line. So I don't fault him being upset, because again, I think we're absolutely more culpable than we're acting. I do think the administrations, like you're saying as well, have kind of fanned those flames. And to your last point, I do not see why we are not more close with Russia. It's not 1952 here. I don't see why. I don't see why there's any reason why we couldn't. Why we're still on opposite sides, if that makes sense. With all we have in common, it just seems a little. It just seems, a lot of these nations that are quote unquote communist aren't really communist. To call China communist in a way, I mean, their economy is not communist in the sense that they've got all these. I forget what they're called, but the economic centers that are allowed to do free trade and all these different things. So it's like all these nations have joined together that actually don't really have as similar governments as the governments are acting they are, if that makes sense.
Well, I definitely think that there is a trend in China to move towards capitalism. They certainly have a lot of capitalist, United States capitalist companies that are doing business there. And
and that's my point. Like, the way they're doing business isn't, and actually, if you go down the rabbit hole, which I didn't do enough, but I know enough to know they started these, I forget what they were called, but these trade zones where essentially anyone within that zone could do business in a completely different way than the rest of China. And that was done like 30 years ago, and that's kind of what set up the economic rise of China in its economy and as a global player on the global stage. So it's really interesting what, like you said, I feel like there's a push going that direction, yet at the same time, the Chinese government obviously has an absolute stranglehold overall over all those companies. And so
no
obviously
question.
there's a lot of, no question.
That's therein lies the rub. And when you ask rhetorically, why can we not just all get along with Russia? I have a very simple answer. We cannot trust them. But then I sit back and I wonder, and I think I have an intellectual obligation to wonder, can they trust us? I watched Trump with Maria Bartiromo on Sunday. It was a great interview. If you haven't seen it, I commend it to you and our listeners. You can go on YouTube and watch it. And Maria Bartiromo and I have been saying the same things for the better part of 3 or 4 years, and that is that China really is the evil empire and that they have invaded our country. They've got police stations, 150,000 fit military men living here. They flooded our southern border with fentanyl. I could go on and on. I won't task our listeners with having to listen to it again. And Trump somewhat stoically looked at her and said, well, do you think we're not doing those things to them? And that really gave me pause. And I think, I just don't know how we get the world to come to a place where we can live and let live. Joe Biden said one thing in 4 years that I felt like had some merit, even though it was a lie. They asked him what our relationship was with China, and he said, well, I would say we're competitors. Well, I don't think we're competitors, but I do. And I think but a lot of our competition is to see who can build the biggest, baddest, most powerful military. But I think if we could somehow turn down that heat, what percentage of our GDP and of the GDP of the countries around the world just stopped military spending today? We all signed a pact. We signed it in blood. No military spending, period. And we take that money and we put it into our respective GDPs. How much better off would our people be? We could cure cancer, stop illiteracy. No one in our country would be homeless, shirtless, or wanting for food. I mean, that seems like such a noble and potential goal if we could get people to sign up to it. But I guess as failed or flawed human beings, we're just not capable of that. There's something about the spirit of mankind that wants to fight and feels the need to fight. I guess because that's the only way I can explain the succession of wars that have occurred just in my lifetime. Starting with my dad was in World War II. I was old enough when I was born to acquire some sense of World War II. I wore my dad's Army hat, and I have his foot locker from World War II today, just in the other room here. And so I have vestiges of World War II in my DNA. And then we saw Korea, and then Vietnam, and then in the modern era we've seen 2 wars in Iraq, and then Afghanistan that lasted 12 or 15 years. Russia was in Afghanistan before we were for 12 years. I mean, what the hell? And then we're on the brink, it feels like, with China if they move on Taiwan. Enough of the madness.
There's a critical number that I want to throw out there that is so critical. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, mainly, and
you youngster.
That was a strange time, and here's why. Since its founding in 1776, the United States has been at war for approximately 222 out of 249 years.
That's a staggering statistic.
This means the U.S. has been involved in conflicts for roughly 89% of its existence, with only 27 years considered years of peace. And a heavy amount of those years, by the way, was in the 80s and 90s. Okay? In the 80s, you had some very small conflicts, but not any wars. Vietnam stopped in 77.
I think the American public was so sick of the Vietnam War. And if anything good came out of Vietnam, that would be it. We lost our appetite for war until we were like a drunk and we forgot the hangover. And now we're not back in it, but I don't think it would take much to just push us. And I think that's what I fault Biden for the most, is that he openly and notoriously gave permission to Zelensky to use armaments that we supplied them to be fired into the heartland of Russia. I mean, it is just by the grace of God that did not catapult us into a nuclear a war with Russia, I think, and Putin threatened it. I mean, he made no secret that nuclear was on the table. I think we came closer than most people realize. That's just my sense.
Hey, so the thing with that is, Putin's not stupid. Putin's actually, he's very smart in a lot of ways, even though, look, he makes, mistakes. I think the invasion was one of them, but he's not stupid. When he's, rattling his nuclear saber, Putin knows that if he does anything, even low yield tactical nukes, it's not going to go well. And so I think that was part of his strategy, was to threaten that. But look, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where we are in a position with these. We've been at war for so many years, and the thing that I learned, being in 2 wars, being in many different countries, is that, and I'm going to make up a number, but 95% of people in every country I've ever been to, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, are relatively decent people who want to raise families, work, provide for their families, spend time with their friends, etc. And 5% of everyone, and again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about there, here, 5% of the people in those countries just want to mess things up for everyone else. It's just, as you said earlier, it's something inherent in our design, for lack of a better term, that just makes some people want to control others, because ultimately all wars come down to one thing. It's someone trying to enact control over another group. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And though it would be amazing to take that money from military spending and use it on helping people, at the end of the day, I do agree with Trump's strategy of peace through strength, because I've seen it firsthand.
There's
that
no other
5%,
way. There's no other
that
option.
5%, that's all they respect. All they respect, truly.
Well, they're to some extent bullies, and I've got the paradigm that, everybody wants to be significant. I want to be significant. Yeah. You want to be significant. Yeah. What's the matter with wanting to be significant and make a difference in the world? Some people want to be significant by building things and building people up. Other people look at a more expedient way to be significant by tearing down. It's so much easier to tear down, criticize, demean than it is to build up. And so that's just sort of, again, that's another part of the world according to John. We're going to do a new segment on the truth called The World According to John. But that's kind of what I believe, because 72 years of observation, I think I've got some insight into the human condition, and that's sort of the way that I see it. I know a small handful of people from Iran, and they are, to a person, they are well educated. They are respectful of others. They dress like you and I do. They are very reasonable people and successful in their own right. And I've engaged with them on what's the matter with Iran. And it's not Iran. It's the radical leaders of Iran.
Yeah, and it's the regime, not the people.
We've got our share of that in our country. You look at our political dynamics. I think both parties have bad elements. The fringe of the Republicans are no better than the fringe. Well, I can't say that. That's not true. I think the fringe element of the Democratic Party are among the worst I've ever seen. I mean, but I'll come back to that at another time and place. But the Republican Party, though, has our fringe right-wing sort of crazed component as well. But then you break it down, I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? What are they crazed about? And most of it is tied up in religion, and most of the religious dogma that they espouse, I agree with. So maybe I'm part of that crazed element of the Republican Party. I don't know. I'm getting myself confused.
Well, you look, in my experience, whether it's, political parties or whatever, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is no one or very few people do the wrong thing truly feeling that it's the wrong thing. Everyone comes down to the fact that everyone is trying to do the right thing. We just have very different ideas of what the right thing is or should be.
Yeah.
And, the one thing you talked about people and how categorizing, for lack of a better term, people, I came up with this thing called, the 3 C's. There's 3 types of people: consumers, creators, and conquerors. And, the creators are, creating things, creating opportunities, creating good things. Consumers don't really create, they just consume. And then the conquerors just want to conquer everything, take from, the consumers and the creators, not by creation or work, but by force. And again, it's sad that it exists in the human condition, but I don't think anyone who truly sees reality for itself really could deny that there's just some people that want to do others harm, and we have to protect not just our our families, our communities, but also our state, our country, and to a degree even the world from people with that mentality. And I think that by bombing the nuclear, Iran is, in my opinion, very laughable with the rhetoric they say, because on one hand, they'll be saying, "Oh, we wanted it for, power, electricity," and then on the other hand, they'll post a picture of a mushroom cloud and say that, we have a surprise that the world will remember for centuries. And those two things, you can't say one and then also say the other. They don't go together.
Yeah.
And so I think they were, in my opinion, who did special operations missions based on intel. The Israeli intel for Iran during this whole situation was shockingly accurate. I don't know exactly the details of it, obviously, but it was accurate to the point where they were targeting individuals, not just targeting individuals, but targeting them in a high rise in their room on a floor, and then taking out that room or that floor, and not the rest of the building. So they had very, very, very accurate intel. And so when Trump said, "Hey, we think they were not days, but some degree close to a nuclear device," I'm believing it based on the intel that I did see them action and the quality of it. And we also know they had people, they had Mossad agents in country. There's no question about it.
Well, I think Mossad has always been credited with being one of the best intel agencies in the world. And so I think your observations are right on. You've written a book called Forged in Chaos, A Warrior's Origin Story. Tell us about the book. Where do we get it? How's it doing? And what's the theme of the book?
Yeah, so it actually comes out literally 2 weeks from today, July 15th.
Congratulations.
The book is... Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a long journey. So what the book is about really is my journey from, it covers my whole life pretty much, but it really is about trying to change the paradigm within the veteran and first responder communities of the problems that we're seeing, the suicide epidemic. And, the current paradigm is we're being told it's PTSD, and I was told that for years. And after, working on myself for well over a decade, I came to a lot of realizations, and the problem is a lot different than we're being told. And so the book essentially covers my life, how I came up with my solutions, and hopefully my solutions that I came up with in the book, and my description of what I consider the real problem, not the symptoms, but the true disease, will hopefully provide a light in the dark for veterans and first responders, to help them through the dark like I was in for so many years.
Well, God bless you for that. And you sounds like you're doing God's work. We don't treat our vets very well, do we?
So now, having wrote the book and went through this whole journey, I mean, I'll say this: yes and no. And here's what I mean by that. No, veterans are not getting the help they need, but I don't think it's intentional by the government, by the VA, and the people that work at the VA. I think the whole thing has, good intent on an individual basis, but as an institution, institutions are very different than individuals, the government. And so the problem I'm seeing is that, how broken fundamentally is our healthcare system? Super broken. And people have to see that the VA is just that same system, except ran solely by the government. It's really not fair, in my opinion, to expect that to give veterans the help they need, because it's based already on a fundamentally broken system that is truly designed to treat symptoms and never cure the disease. And that's what we're seeing with our veterans. and even the disease we're being told it is, I at this point feel that I can prove that is not the actual disease.
And is that what you deal with in your book? Is that the thrust of it?
Yes, absolutely. I basically talk about, what the, and I'll just say it this way because it's kind of an easy way to explain it. If, PTSD awareness and treatment options are at an all-time high, and yet the problem of veterans, committing suicide is getting worse. So if treatment and awareness is at an all-time high and the problem is getting worse, then to me, that's a red flag. Logically, that tells me then what they're saying is the problem isn't the problem, because if it was, it would be getting better.
Yeah.
And I identify in the book what I believe the real problem is, which isn't, by the way, one thing. It's a cluster of things. And I pick that apart, separate them, explain them, and then provide solutions for them in the book. That worked for me, and hopefully that will work for other people.
So what wars did you serve in?
Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, I assumed that, but I didn't
Yeah,
want to.
and then I actually got blown up in Sadr City, which is a neighborhood in Baghdad, and got medically retired. So I was, in and out of surgeries for 4 years. It was a long recovery. Then I went through a period of, in hindsight, no doubt, clinical depression and identity loss and lost purpose and all these different things, which again were not awesome at the time. But now I look back at all that, and really it was a blessing, because that experience is what has provided me ultimately with the answers that I'm sharing with other people now. And I feel very, very confident in the book's ability to help not just the veterans or first responders themselves, but also immediate family and loved ones that may be trying to understand why those people are acting and behaving in the ways they are.
Now, I was just trying to remember. Are you familiar with Jack Carr, the author?
Oh, yes.
He's been
absolutely
on our show, and he's written all nonfiction except for the.
You mean all fiction?
All fiction except for the attack on our embassy in Beirut, which is a nonfiction work, which is very compelling. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tyler Gray, author of Forged in Chaos, A Warrior's Origin Story. And also, I would have to say, a patriot, a hero who has put himself on the line for his country. We thank you from the depths of our heart for your service. And we certainly wish you well and hope you'll come back on and join us again. It's been a fun conversation.
Yes, except next time in person.
Let's do that. We're new neighbors. I look forward to meeting you in person. All right.
Same. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good one.
Our listeners know that I hate, and I mean hate, injustice of any form. And when we run across people who are the victims of injustice, we try to highlight them on the show and bring their story to light. That's what we're going to do with Fred Galvin. Right now, he is retired from the Marine Corps, where he served with distinction for 27 years, with a little footnote that we will get into. He served with distinction, but his career was sidetracked for a spell. He's written a book, a compelling book called A Few Bad Men, the true story of the U.S. Marines ambushed in Afghanistan and betrayed in America. And therein lies his story. Fred, thank you for joining us on The Truth today.
Thank you for having me, John.
So you write in your book that you did exactly what you were instructed to do and commanded to do in the Marines, and then you were subsequently persecuted for it. Is that right?
That's correct, John.
Tell us your story, if you would.
Absolutely. So for the listeners that are veterans, they probably know that the Marine Corps resisted getting into the Special Operations Command when it was activated in 1987. And then after years following the attacks on 9/11, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, said, you will create a component in the Special Operations Command. So in 2006, that did happen. I was the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force commander, and we manned, trained, and equipped a Special Operations Task Force, which we deployed to Afghanistan. And on our 30th patrol, we were operating in the Tor Bor mountain areas, right at the border of Afghanistan, Pakistan. So we could not go into Pakistan. That became a sanctuary for the Taliban and Al Qaeda to radicalize and fully train foreign fighters and suicide bombers. They bring them across the border. Of course, America paved or paid for a road, the first highway that was very useful into importing foreign fighters to fight the war in Afghanistan and exporting their main cash crop, which was opium and poppy. So we went into this village, and John, you know what I'm about ready to talk about. The first major village inside Afghanistan, that's going to be basically like an Amazon distribution center or fulfillment center. You're going to link up with those foreign fighters, with their handlers, and ship them off to fight the infidels in Kabul and Kandahar, and that's just exactly what was going on. But we had completely bomb-proof intelligence of 4 suicide bombers. We knew their exact home, what they were being harbored up in. But in 2006, they had these new NATO rules of engagement, which basically were the handcuffs put on American forces because we had runaway success in Afghanistan up to that point. But this new strategy was, these rules of engagement was the counterinsurgency strategy, the winning hearts and minds that worked so unsuccessfully in Vietnam. So we resurrected it, of course, hijacked the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm. So we go rolling into this village, not to action what we call this target, these 4 suicide bombers, but because the rules of engagement did not allow. So we had to sit down with the tribal elders, which was our purpose that morning, and basically suss out some information to build this federal case to later do it. And hopefully those people won't kill us, but that's what their intention was that morning. We didn't even get a chance to get out of our vehicles. We came into the village. We were slowing down, and a van filled with massive amounts of shrapnel and fuel detonated right at the front of our patrol. Then we had a vehicle with 4 suicide jihadists trying to come at the front of our patrol that just got hit with that suicide bomber, and they tried to finish us off. But we did what United States Marines are trained to do in an ambush. We counterattacked, made quick work, killed all those jihadists. Then we started receiving fire immediately on the opposite side of the road to our right in a dry riverbed. We quickly aimed in. This happened at 9 o'clock in the morning, John, so this wasn't limited visibility, fog of war, but we were receiving sniper fire from a hilltop. They dragged a vehicle across the road, blocking us in this kill zone, attempting to kill our entire patrol of 30 Americans. We killed everybody that was shooting at us. We fired over the heads of this mob that was unarmed, and then we drove around this obstacle and returned to our base. And 20 minutes later, John, just think about if this happened here in Palm Beach, within 20 minutes of something happening, this was on the international media saying that Marines had killed, mass murdered women and children and civilians in this town. Taliban, this is a Taliban-controlled town, so they were saying, stoking the narrative that we were drunk and that we dismounted and went door to door just murdering, sport killing. They had a protest that went up to their governor, went up to their president, Hamid Karzai. He condemned us. And we were working, our Marine Special Operations Task Force was working for an Army colonel. And John, that's like bringing a Marine Special Operations Task Force to work for the Green Berets. That's equivalent to bringing your girlfriend to meet your wife. That we were completely unwanted. This was like the lowest form of gut punch. So the Army was happy to get us kicked out. That's exactly what happened. They turned it over to the Marines. And when you read the book A Few Bad Men, and you see what the Marine Corps senior leadership did as far as dogpiling 45 criminal investigators and 4 prosecuting attorneys, interrogating Marines, threatening to deport one Marine's family if they did not sign the Naval Criminal Investigative Service's prepared statement, that actually occurred. You can Google search my name and ABC News, look at and listen to the Marine from 2015 talk about that on ABC. This happened in America. So when you talk about lawfare, if it can happen to frontline foot soldiers, if it can happen to the President of the United States, this type of corruption, this abuse of power should never be tolerated. Those people should be held accountable. But when you read this book and you see what happened in that court and how they fought me for 11 years to not have this courtroom transcript declassified, which now is, I mean, what I described to you, John, is a garden variety gun battle. It's not Jason Bourne's knock list or some location of the submarines at sea with tomahawks. It's gun battle. And there's no reason to classify and move the media out of the courtroom day after day during all defense witnesses' exculpatory comments. But this type of abuse, this is Gestapo tactics. This is what happens when the largest employer in the United States, by far the most lethal, starts to decide, hey, we're going to, and we were exonerated, but the press ran away. When the press printed only what they heard, well, then we were professionally destroyed in the media, and that kept going. I mean, I continued to serve 7 more years after this until I hit service limitation due to my rank. And but the professional destruction had a lot of long-lasting effects against the Marines and our task force.
I can only imagine. And there you were putting your very life on the line for your country, and that's the appreciation that you were shown. That has to be a difficult burden for you to carry, I would imagine, even to this day, in spite of the fact that you were subsequently exonerated. So I want to ask you, who set the meeting up between your unit and this council of elders in the Afghanistan village?
Very good question. So we went in unannounced. But when I say unannounced, we were, just prior to that, we had to establish there was an army base right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that was called Torkham Pass. And we had to coordinate with the army there to, and this is in the book, John, we had to coordinate to have a quick reaction force in case we got ambushed. So this is a really bad area, but we had to have forces staged there to do immediate quick response in case we get into a sticky situation. And so this area is surrounded by high ground. And as soon as we came in there in our Humvees and we dismounted to talk to the Army leadership, we saw an Army patrol doing their immediate action drills, which I thought, oh, that's great. That's good discipline. They're out here doing a rehearsal before they go out on their mission. So, but the problem with that, as you know, John, is when you're surrounded by high ground in a Taliban-controlled area, there's going to be observers that are watching. Okay, they're about ready to leave on a patrol. So we left before that Army patrol did, and we went into this village unannounced to do this tribal leader engagement. And because the Army had telegraphed what they were about ready to do, we were the ones that got hit on that patrol. So we don't let them know ahead of time by any coordination and communication to the Taliban or people in that village, but obviously they were watching American bases and were able to prepare a deliberate ambush against us.
Well, that was the question I was trying to get to, is how did they become so well prepared? How much time intervened from when you left your base to the time that you arrived at the village?
There was about a 1 hour time block. So we did some coordinate. We left our base at the Jalalabad airfield at 6 o'clock. We went through that. The atmospherics were totally different when we passed through there earlier. Men, women, children. This was a marketplace, so they were buying different items. But when we came back through, the pattern of life completely shifted. And we knew from past missions that when you see this mass exodus of women and children, you're about ready to get the rear naked chokehold, and they're, it's very well aware. So we saw everyone lined up on the road like a parade or a funeral, just fighting age men lined up on the side of the road, and you could tell they're looking for a fight, and that's exactly what came. As soon as we saw those atmospherics, I said over the radio, watch out, and then boom, this car bomb detonated in front of us. So
wow.
They definitely knew what's going on. They wanted to protect that village.
Was there any piece of you that felt set up by this? I mean, do you think that somebody could have brought this on your unit intentionally?
Looking back, John, I honestly thought this was, and I still do think the intended target was the Army, who they were in broad daylight doing their rehearsals with ability for the enemy to observe that. So they were telegraphing they were going to leave that morning. So it was just a matter of time. So
not
the enemies,
intentionally,
of course,
but it was just a consequence of what they were doing.
yes. So their enemy is loading the ambush site. They're sitting there on a hair trigger, ready to pull the trigger as soon as they get the. And we went into the Tora Bora Mountains. We went on a circuitous route up into the mountains to see where we could. Our mission was to go up into the mountains there and hunt down Bin Laden. That's where he was last seen. And then when we went into that village for the second portion of the patrol's mission to engage the tribal leader in that village, I'm sure the Taliban thought this was the army patrol, and they got a Marine response. Because one thing I didn't mention, I'm not trying to disparage the army at all. This was just this one platoon that was stationed at the Tora Bora Mountains. And when they were doing their rehearsals, they were saying contact front. And the turret gunners in the turrets of these Humvees would duck down and they would announce drive, drive, drive. So their tactic for that 66 military police patrol was to duck and run, to get out of there. And the enemy, they attacked very violently with suicide bombers, which is unpredictable. John, you can't tell where the next suicide bomber is coming, if he's coming in a van or on foot. So they use those tactics of not just using shrapnel that had evolved now to putting a large amount of fuel. So when a human body burns and you hear your brothers in arms screaming and writhing, excruciating pain from their skin melting, and you see that does a lot of psychological damage and causes fear, which creates hesitation, and people want to stay away from that area. And that was the Taliban's goal, that this was a logistics node. They did not want American forces patrolling anywhere near there.
I see.
And there were subsequent many raids that went on there by other special operations forces because that was an enemy stronghold.
So they had pretty much continual preparedness for engagement if you guys showed up there. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. However, John, we did overwhelm them. We had 6 Humvees, machine guns on every turret, and we did make quick work. And that's what we were trained to do. One of our Marines, he did receive some shrapnel in the arm from the blast. That suicide van filled with explosives. This is a miracle. If you believe in miracles, this van went off right in the front bumper. It contacted our vehicle, and the Marine in the turret got some shrapnel in his right bicep, and he was on fire. So he was knocked down in the turret from that blast. He stood up, extinguished his flames, oriented to the south side of the road to his left, and saw this Toyota Prado sports utility vehicle with a driver and 3 jihadists, firing at us with fully automatic AK-47s and trying to finish that vehicle off, which that vehicle that they hit with the suicide bomber, it had a troop compartment. Every other Humvee was completely enclosed in steel, but this one was used as our ambulance. Obviously, the enemy's going to target the weakest link, so they hit that vehicle and they tried to finish that vehicle off. But our Marines did what American Marines are trained to do, and without any hesitation. It was very heroic to see with my eyes directly in front of me, a Marine stand back up, extinguish these flames and get on his medium machine gun and destroy the enemy. But that driver jumped out of the vehicle and he continued to fight against us from this ditch. And that same driver, when we passed in our vehicle, we shot at him and we couldn't get him, but we did see him, and he testified against us from Jalalabad Airfield, a U.S. base, a year later during our trial, and saying that he swore on the Quran and to Allah that everything he's going to say is truthful. And he changed his testimony that he made to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, saying 3 people were killed in his vehicle. And then during the actual trial, he said only 2, because he himself was on this high-level terrorist. I can't give the name of the agency, and so was his cousin. So these were not guys on some Saturday night knitting circle. These were, bad hombres, and they were there to kill us. And NCIS used these in the prosecution as their star witnesses, bringing them on a base. They paid them salacious payments. They paid for 3 people, equivalent of 4 years average Afghan salary for every single person that was killed. We paid a terrorist. But as you've likely heard, we paid terrorists under the Biden administration over $40 million a week. That people have to be held accountable for, aiding and abetting our enemies. But like my grandfather used to say, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. And that seems like where it went in Afghanistan.
So what was the time frame that this occurred? When did it happen?
Yes, John, good question. So we deployed in 2007 and the trial was in 2008. So if you recall this tail of the tape timeline, and I'm from Eastern Kansas, I had no political affiliation as a young major, but this was going into a general presidential election cycle against where Senator McCain and Senator Obama were running against each other. They had requested and been granted a surge into Iraq of 100,000 American forces. It was very bloody in the media, and the media was painting that picture of, look at what Bush is doing. If you elect McCain, you'll have more of this. And Obama, people didn't know he was an inspirational speaker, but we were pawns being used in this big chess game to look at what Marines are now doing in Afghanistan.
So do you remember the date that the battle occurred?
Yes, we were ambushed on March 4th, 2007.
All right. So how many people did we lose? How many casualties did we have in that?
So, John, I've never lost a Marine in combat. One Marine was wounded with shrapnel, and he was burned a little bit, but that was it.
So
on that mission.
Then you immediately returned to your base after that?
So that vehicle had its communication knocked out. And after that engagement, the first thing we're trained to do if we get contact is dominate the fight. So we eliminated the threat. We had to use hand and arm signals because we didn't have radio communication with that vehicle. As soon as it entered that fireball, that van, we thought we lost everybody. I mean, it was that big. It scorched the trees, the branches over 100 feet in the air.
Wow.
I mean, I've seen tons of roadside bombs, but this was the biggest. So we had to gain communication and find out, is everybody okay? Can that vehicle move, or does it need to be towed? And as soon as we realized this took us less than 5 minutes, we departed the air. Our gunner in the first vehicle fired over the heads of the mob that was swarming towards us. And then we just drove around that vehicle that was T-boned in the middle of the road and went back to our base. And then as soon as we got back, I had one of the Marine sergeants, tell me, I was on the patrol, and as a commander, he came up to me and said, "Sir, this is already on BBC radio." Within 20 minutes of us being attacked, this was already out on BBC. And then short to follow that same day, New York Times, Washington Post. Then it was on every major headline in the world.
Well, how did it get on BBC in such a short order?
Great question. So, unfortunately, some of your audience probably remembers this member of the media very early in 2001 named Mr. Pearl, who he was captured and then he was actually killed, beheaded. So what that caused is obvious fear in the media. So what they started to do is instead of using Americans, and they still did use American or Western reporters they would embed with the military, but when they couldn't do that, they would employ stringers. These are trusted agents that lived in the villages. And now if you're living in a Taliban-controlled village, I will say this, because now we've become much more adept at the enemy using disinformation or information warfare. But at that time, we really didn't. This was a nascent stage of that. So the enemy spun this so quickly. They use this two-pronged attack. So if they attack us and kill us, victory. If they attack us and somehow lose, which they were thinking they're fighting the army, and army's just going to duck and run, they won't lose. But if they should lose, they have a prepared story all ready to go out. And I forget the name of the actual reporter that broke it, but he broke it first to the BBC and then the Associated Press, but it went everywhere. And then they use these tactics all the time. Ours, they didn't have the reason. I mean, there was not a body, not a photo of a body, not any blood or bullet. Later, they used other photos that were proven from a different time period. But in our case, they did not have a legitimate photo of anyone killed. And then that Army Military Police Patrol, I mean, these are trained Army military police officers. They came in about 10 minutes right after we were ambushed, and the only dead body that they found was the headless, limbless corpse of the suicide bomber. But they did find brass, not only on the road where we were, we didn't get off that road in that village, but they found it off of the main road as well. So they found it where enemy was fighting us. So and then ironically, right before the Air Force, they sent an Air Force investigator to investigate this. Before he came, in the Naval Criminal Investigative Service came, the military police, they're trained, so they had bags of evidence of this ammunition, the brass. They threw it in the fire the night before the Naval Criminal Investigative Service came in to conduct statements. So
why would they do that? I mean, y'all are fighting for the same team.
Not necessarily, John.
What was the motivation behind that?
I believe money and power. And you see, this is something that, just like in politics, and I'm not a politician, but the best don't rise to the top. It's the people who are the critics who point the finger. And just like I remember after I retired and went to our MBA, we had a public policy residency in DC, and they said, the reason you will never see the end of, there'll never be an end to negative ads is they're proven to be the most effective. Yeah. So it was very effective for these Army officers to say, look at what these Marines did. And they had this speech. If you Google search Colonel John Nicholson, these Marines killed these innocent Afghans in cold blood. And, Jack Murtha, from former congressman from West Virginia, he did the same thing. And he was a Vietnam vet in the Marine Corps. He said that about the Marines in Haditha. But, it's really sick, whether it's right now. I'm talking about last week in the attack that we did to neuter Iran of their nuclear weapons, and members of the media, members of Congress, defense intelligence officials are trash talking, leaking information, hoping, they're siding with the enemy. And, they're hoping that it didn't have the effect. And in our case, similarly, but a little bit the opposite, they're wishing for the worst. They're like, look at this, set us back. It didn't set us back at all. We attacked the enemy. I was there. And I took a polygraph. No deception indicated that there was no civilians killed that morning at all. And the same unanimous statements of all 30 of the men on the patrol. So when our leaders, and when you read the book, A Few Bad Men, the first thing I'd ask people to look at is go back to Appendix 3 and read those 73 statements that NCIS took of the Afghans and see, would you believe all these contradictory statements that we came in tanks, that we were drunk and went door to door, kill? I mean, they're all different. It makes no sense at all. Most of them, continuous amounts said, I was told by my tribal elder to come here and get money. And NCIS said, well, we're not offering you money. That's somebody else. Then they immediately got up and left. And many of them denied an attack after that. But it's when you're paying people, is there incentive? You better believe it. John, if right there in Palm Beach, if people were offering 4 years average American salary, if they were saying, I'll pay you $250,000, you don't need to show any proof whatsoever, just go down to City Hall, there'd be more than 19 people lining up with a story to tell you. So
it's just hard to digest that and hard to accept that could happen in our great country. And were you ever able to track it back to the head of the snake? Somebody had to be the puppet master to wage this criminal investigation and subsequent trial against you all.
One of the jury members in the military, they call it a panel member, but it's akin to a jury member. His comments that he's made in the Military Times after this was over, and he advocated, you can Google search that on the Task Force Violent and Military Times and listen to this jury member, Steve Morgan, Floridian, and he's talks about it with a lot of strong emotions, that he says this was the perfect storm of bad officers. And he goes on to say not just Army officers, not just Air Force officers. He uses the phrase doggone Marine officers. And what happened is, I'll go back very briefly, high level. In World War II, there was the British Royal Marines, and Churchill wanted to create this commando force to go behind German lines. So he created the British Royal Marine Commandos, and they were very successful. Roosevelt wanted the same thing. So he created the Marine Raiders. And right after Pearl Harbor, the Marine Raiders were created in February of 42. They conducted a very successful attack on Macon Island, which caused the Japanese to have to distribute their force all across the Pacific, making them weaker, where they couldn't strong point big islands like Guadalcanal. But while FDR was still the president, in only 2 years, the Marines disbanded it with the stroke of a pen in one sentence. They comment on the Marine Corps said it's not in the best interest of the Marine Corps to have an elite with an elite, and it went away. So these handpicked units, the Marine Corps has never liked, and it took Rumsfeld in 2001. He said all of the joint services will increase their capacity for special operations forces. The Marine Corps was the only one that didn't comply. And smartly, the Marines were probably hedging their bets and saying, Bush 43 will be like his father, he'll be a one-term president. Well, that didn't happen. He was reelected, and he kept Rumsfeld initially. And Rumsfeld ordered the Marine Corps, you will activate. And the Marine Corps had slow rolled, we'll send some Marine officers to be liaisons down at the Special Operations Command in Tampa. And that didn't appease Rumsfeld. And then they did this proof of concept to see if our elite, the Force Recon Marines, which I had been serving in, could even compete with Green Berets and Rangers and SEALs. Well, that supposed to last 2 years. It got dragged on for 3 years. After Bush got reelected, Rumsfeld lost it and said, you're going to activate this. And that's when we started the very first Special Operations Task Force. I was selected as a commander, and we deployed to Afghanistan. But I say that background, John, that the Army didn't want competition because that's an extra piece of the pie that has to be shared. The Marine Corps, they didn't want this at all. And when you have this first ability to have some kind of melee type of incident of the 21st century, this is the ability to scuttle this whole organization. So the Marine Corps, you read this book and you ask the question, who did this and how have you been able to process it? The Marine Corps did far worse than the Taliban. The Marine Corps senior leadership, I'm not talking, let me rephrase that, not the Marine Corps, a few bad men.
Yes.
Just like the movie A Few Good Men, like your title of your show, The Truth, you can handle the truth. And a few bad men developed this, hey, this is what we're going to do. And they went along with it. And one of our, God bless him, the late Congressman Walter Jones, who was a district representative where we were stationed there in North Carolina, said, Major Galvin, this just went too far. And he saw these military leaders that were just dogpiling on us and the tactics that they used to deceive and trick Marines. And the goal was to imprison us. And
well, why would the Marine leadership want to allow this to happen to you? I was expecting you to say that the Marine leadership would come to your defense and push back on the Army that somehow felt that they had to compete against the Marines.
Yes, and this is what happens when there's extreme prejudice against, hey, we don't need elite Marines. We want to get rid of this. And this is the narrative that we're going to stick with. And you guys are disposable.
So that was a means to an end that they were determined to get.
It was.
So
they did narrow it down on that patrol to there was 30 men on the patrol. They narrowed it down to 7 of us. And then only when it came to a trial, myself and one other Marine, we went to trial. It was the only of the 120-man Marine Special Operations Task Force, just myself and one other went to trial. Thank God that.
So Marine only 2 people went to a trial.
Yes.
What happened to the other 5?
They just narrowed it down and said, hey, you know what? We're gonna aim like a laser on these 2 leaders, and if we fell, then like I wrote in the book, obviously those 5 others would likely go down with us. But we went in the courtroom, and that same jury member, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Morgan, said to the Military Times in a subsequent televised, recorded address that's online. He said, we had all these read-aheads from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service it's akin to propaganda. I mean, they had an agenda. He goes, but in the first day of the trial, he goes, that narrative started to fall apart immediately. And he goes, then we saw this is not what we'd been reading. So we have to be very careful when you're talking, as you mentioned at the start of your show about justice, that it is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's what our media right now happens to do. It's a lie that started in the Garden of Eden. It's a half-truth that's mixed with something that's going to tickle our ear, that we have some fear or we want to believe that, but it's wrong. And we have to use sound judgment and discernment to figure out and test to prove, is this right or wrong? But that came out in the courtroom. It came out very clear, but there was no reason to ever move the media out of the courtroom. And that didn't happen one time. That happened for 3.5 weeks, again and again. And as I said on my radio show, I just interviewed the court reporter, and because I just, after all these years, finally connected with her, and I've never met her outside that courtroom. And obviously I was on trial, so, there wasn't a friendship, but she said this has affected her so much it caused her to get out of the Marine Corps because she lost trust in the Marine Corps.
Oh,
and she said, well, they didn't do it for efficiency because she was the stenographer. She had to record, okay, now I have to shut this unclassified system down. We have to move, the court personnel have to move the media out of the courtroom. And now she has to log into a stenography system that's classified. It just took a lot longer to do all that.
But they only kicked the media out when the defense was presenting. Is that what I'm understanding?
And not just people who were eyewitnesses, John. They kicked them out during my former commanding officers and character witnesses. I'd have character witnesses that had never been to Afghanistan. Again and again, they'd move them out. Anyone with exculpatory evidence, even if it was the Taliban and they knew that, okay, this is going to sound ridiculous and we know this, well, they would get the media out of there because they didn't want to hear, this guy stumble over himself and pass out all this conjecture and hearsay and scuttlebutt. So they totally controlled the narrative.
So how long did the trial last?
It was 3.5 weeks.
And you had a Marine defense attorney? Someone was appointed to represent you?
I did have a military defense counsel, as well as I had. Now, this isn't jaywalking. The punishment for this is death, is max punishment. So I had a civilian counsel that I had as well. And so did the co-defendant.
And how well did you feel you were represented by your lawyers?
Very well. And during their opening statements, I felt this was Mike Tyson against a blind person in a wheelchair. It was just so overwhelming. It was not a fair fight. And it's not just theatrics, but my military defense counsel, he took this wooden movable podium and he was picking up and slamming it down. He's like, and he's pointing to the prosecutors, these Marine officers. He's like, which are by the JAG, the Judge Advocate General instructions. They're not allowed to dress in civilian clothes and impersonate. Now, NCIS can't, their bylaws allow them to use deception, but a Marine prosecutor has to identify themselves and cannot use deception. And he's like, these Marine officers, pointing to the prosecution, they use deception. They intentionally they sat in on interrogations, and he was requesting again and again the videotapes, and they never gave us the videotapes that came out on the record in the courtroom. And then later we've requested those for years. They destroyed the videotapes of these interviews. This is,
my gosh,
this is worse than stuff you hear about Hillary Clinton doing. Just the destruction of evidence, the obstruction of justice. But again, this happened against Marines as we were fighting our way out of an ambush where we were surrounded and outnumbered, and they got the edge on us. They attacked us before we even knew it was coming. And if we had dismounted, which, like the Afghans said, I mean, 3 other suicide bombers would have likely used that. I mean, the strength that we had was our armored vehicles. Now, you get out, you give up that strength, and we would have definitely lost more lives or had someone's life lost. But thank God that didn't happen.
Were you worried when you realized or understood that the BBC had broadcast the events of the ambush? Did you think that was going
I don't
to
want to sound like a tough guy, but I'm a Christian and I believe that God, I was under his wing, but I was concerned that, okay, this is not some of this is a complex situation. They're very sophisticated if they could do this that fast. And then I knew, like, okay, we're up against something much more powerful. If right after that they're starting these riots, and this is going up to the governor and to the president, and Hamid Karzai publicly condemned this and put pressure on the generals who were glad, the army generals were glad to see us kicked out. But I knew right away this is not favorable, and they're trying to destroy us.
So what was the result of the trial? The military tribunal.
Very good question. So this is the very first military case, and I looked and have done some research. Most cases they adjudicate within the same day, usually within an hour. There's usually not too many hung juries, but I think the longest was, later that day. So our trial was from the 7th to the 29th of January in 2008. They waited till Memorial Day weekend to release the findings, and they put it out just like this coming Friday, 4th of July. They put it out on Friday night news dump. And as you know, just like on Memorial Day, same thing on Labor Day, or same thing on 4th of July. There's very few holidays where the Pentagon goes to like a skeleton crew over those 4-day, we call them Liberty period. But so they dropped it to one source, Estes Thompson of the Associated Press. And they used this phrase. They didn't use legal terms, John. This is mass murder, the largest number killed by machine guns in Afghanistan. They said not innocent, not guilty, not dismissed. Those are legal terms. They said we acted appropriately. So the press ran with that and continued to slander us for 7 more years that I continued to serve. And on the day of my retirement, they still said that, how they got my retirement date. I mean, it's not like I announced it. But I believe there's a lot of coordination that occurred between the military and the media to continue to hang this on me, knowing that I'm getting out of the military, and they put a gag order on us, which I was still subject to while I was in the military. But the day I got out, the Military Times attacked us. They attacked us saying that we killed 19 and wounded another 50, which is total false narrative.
But you had been exonerated. Did I understand you to say that?
Well,
if acting appropriately is not exoneration, I don't know what is.
And it took 12 years for me to continue to fight, not just to get the courtroom transcripts declassified. That took 11 years, but 12 years to fight. And finally, the Pentagon released a 12-page statement. This is in, Bush 45 or Trump 45's administration, but they had made a decision in May of 2018. Now, the Secretary of Defense at that time was Jim Mattis, who was also the convening authority of our trial when he was Lieutenant General Jim Mattis. So he was the one that authorized the 45 criminal investigators and 4 prosecuting attorneys. And if he didn't approve these tactics, he lost control of the investigation, which he is the convening authority is the judge and juror. He's the one that has the ultimate say. But to answer your question, they waited 4.5 months for a Friday night of a 4-day weekend where it could just be easily buried, and they just dropped it to Estes Thompson, one news source. So was that deliberate? I'll probably never find out. God only knows. But you have to make an assumption of why does every other military case in history they make a ruling within the day, and ours it took them 4.5 months, and then they do it on a Friday night news dump. But that led to us continually being attacked in the press. Like this would happen while I was still serving, but I couldn't do anything. While I was still serving and still deploying back to Afghanistan to combat, you had which was dangerous because, okay, now we got a label, we got a target on our backs. You got Amnesty International, the International Bar Association saying, this case needs to be resurrected. These Marines got away with murder. This is going on, and you have the Guardian and all these other news sources year after year just destroying us in the press, and that's all in the book. Those are quotes from media sources. And then the year I retire, the day I retired, the Marine Corps birthday that same year, and then the Washington Post also dogpiled. It just kept. That's when I fought back, and I had to stand, because you're not going to get a job if you are like the Jeffrey Dahmer, the poster boy for mass murder. And I had to start my own business, which was a blessing in disguise. But it was important to stand up and fight back and have the truth be told, both in the omni-channel media as well as writing a book that's incontrovertible. I mean, those are their sworn statements. That's not me saying any of this. That's what people said in their sworn statement in a court of law in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Did you ever consider suing these people for false prosecution and defamation?
Honestly, John, it's not like I'm too ignorant about that, because
pretty hard to
during
do.
our MBA class, I knew
pretty
business
tough.
law, that was slander, defamation of character. But
if you can show intentional and willful misconduct, then I think you could get over the exclusions, perhaps.
The goal is to have
High
them
bar.
repent. Yeah. Psalm 94:23 talks about God's going to hold justice. And it's important that I forgive and let that move on. But I wanted to make sure that America, this is the largest employer. And this wasn't a one-off. This past December 27th, a case that took almost 6 years called ours was the MARSOC 7 case. There was originally 7 of us who were named in a criminal investigation. Another case happened in the country of Iraq with 3 other special operators from the Marine Special Operations Command. And that happened on New Year's Day of 2019. It just adjudicated the 27th of December, 2024. But you read about the MARSOC 3, and they had this this is another self-defense case in combat. But it's just it's absolutely sick and disgusting that we have military, not just with their hands tied behind their back, but the Marine Corps loves this the most, to use their phrase, the good order and discipline. And it's kind of like an acronym, good order and discipline for God. They have this God complex that if this causes our reputation to be tarnished, or to be perceived to be tarnished, we will hold you. We're going to put this at the lowest spot. We'll find the Oliver North. We will make sure that somebody wears that, scarlet S, and it's not going to be somebody in the Pentagon. It's going to be the person at that tactical level, at the point of friction. So what's the incentive to go out and wage the war against the enemy if your leaders are going to throw you under the bus?
100%. And my question to them would be, you were ambushed by the Taliban, and with a suicide bomber and explosives like none other that you had seen before that, and no civilians were killed. What would they have had you do? Did they think that it would have been more appropriate for you to have not resisted and not gotten out of there alive? I mean, what are the options given that scenario?
John, in that same interview that I mentioned earlier of the Marine here's his crime. This sergeant who was driving the vehicle that was attacked by the suicide bomber, he was the driver. It detonated right in front of his face on his bumper, but he legally immigrated to the United States during a time of war. And he enlisted in the Marine Corps to serve his country. And he served at 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company. And we took him to be a plank owner, a founding member in our Marine Special Operations Task Force. And they go after, threatening to deport him. And in the same interview that you can hear on ABC News, if you'd ask, Fred Galvin, ABC, listen to this young sergeant who continued to go on and serve, say, the next time I'm fired at, I will hesitate to return fire, because it's easier to just be shot at than to return fire if I have to go through this again. Those are his words.
Yeah.
And I was shocked to hear him say that, but it really.
Has any person or entity given you any sort of an apology or any sort of official excusing of what occurred?
Answer that in two ways. So no one in uniform. People have asked once I published the book. They said, "What's the response in the Marine Corps?" The response in the Marine Corps is nothing. They did have General Dunford, who was he was a former commandant. He's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then the commandant say, "Well, we wish Fred Galvin well." But that's after, in 2019, the day after Mattis was fired, when they had this 12-page report. And here in that 12-page report, they by named these bad men. They use their names, and which are in the book. They explicitly described what they did. They used words such as immoral, and this was unjust. But you know who signed that, John? No one in uniform. Who signed that was general counsels in the Department of the Navy, in the Pentagon, Catherine Kesselmeyer and Elizabeth Hill, civilian attorneys. They were the ones that had the guts to, just like the Jack Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth, but you can. But the military, no one in uniform has said squat as far as a legal term saying you are innocent or not guilty, or that this is finally over. But that 12-page report sets the record straight. And if you really want to read what happened, buy the book and read that, and you'll be shocked. The most commonly used word that I hear people say in reviews or to my face is, "This is the most disturbing case that I've ever seen." And I've heard that from attorneys, military, legal professionals. It's like this court reporter. She said this led to me losing trust in the Marine Corps and getting out. And I didn't hear her say that from when I last saw her at 2008 as working in the courtroom until I just interviewed her 2 weeks ago. It's really a shame.
Well, I first want to say thank you for what you've done for our country. And secondly, I'm very sorry that you've had to experience this. I think you surely are entitled to much, much better and different treatment. I think that you should have been decorated as a hero for standing up to the enemy and protecting the other men that were in your detail. So I would say I wish you well, but I don't like those words any longer.
God's blessed myself and the men. They've struggled through a lot. Yes. It was not easy for these men to face this kind of betrayal, much like the scene from Braveheart when he jousted the knight on the horse and finds that's the King of Scotland that he's fighting for. To have that betrayal, that who you're fighting for is the person you're fighting against. They're wearing the same uniform as yourself. Our men faced that, they overcame that, and they've had extreme success in recent years because they persevered. And God bless them all.
Well, you were fighting for what we celebrate on July 4th, and that is our independence and our freedom. So thank you for that, Major Fred Galvin. And I hope the book does extremely well. And I hope you get the good recognition that you so rightly deserve before it's all said and done. Where do we find your book, and how do we keep up with you?
So on Amazon, it's available on Audible, hardback, and Kindle. And you can find out more about the book at commandoshow.com.
All right. Well, thank you, Fred. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And again, thanks for coming on the show with us today.
Thank you, John. Have a good Independence Day.
There's a lot of disruption happening around the world today, and particularly in the realm of economics as Donald Trump reshapes the U.S. economy and as Elon Musk attempts to solve the labor problem. Here to help us sort it all out is Dr. Steve Hanke. Dr. Hanke, I've seen a lot of CVs in my day, but I don't know when you've had time to eat. You're a distinguished scholar with the Mises Institute, right there next to Georgia at Auburn, Alabama. And you have been a fellow at the Independent Institute of Oakland, California. You also were a senior advisor at Renmin University of China's International Monetary Research Institute in Beijing. It goes on and on. You've advised presidents. You've served on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors for Maryland. I mean, it's a 2-page CV. It makes me feel small. I've got to expand mine.
I think I'm older than you are, John.
Not much. No, I think we would probably be labeled contemporaries. So one thing I would really like to get into with you is through your work with the China International Monetary Research Institute in Beijing, it is my belief that we are at war. And I mean that literally, with China.
Well,
and General Robert Spalding, a retired general with the Air Force, has written a book called Stealth War. Peter Schweitzer has written 2 compelling books called Red Handed, and the last one, I can't remember, I'll come up with it. And then Gordon Chang has written another book about overarching influence in our country by China. You couple that with 150,000 military-age fit men that have crossed our southern border from China, along with enough fentanyl in our nation to kill every living American, and a spy balloon that hovered over our most sensitive military bases. I could go on. This is your interview, so I'll stop. But it really concerns me. What insight do you have, and do you share my concern about China's influence and overarching grabs inside our country, like 300,000 acres of farmland around our military bases? This is serious stuff. What do you think?
Well, so just one thing, and speaking of time, I am speaking to you from Baltimore today, not Beijing.
Yes.
And I'm a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, but and I'm in my 56th year. So, as I said, I've been around a lot longer than you have.
Well, I'm 72. I don't think you look that much old.
I got you by 10 years. So.
All right. Well, you'll be my new big brother. That.
Yeah. Okay. Good. At any rate, let's pivot to China. I think most people don't realize that we are at war with China, meaning the U.S. has declared war on China. So, and this is gradually crept into the system, but was enunciated pretty clearly in the Biden administration. And you have a whole phalanx of neoconservatives who are just dying to wind things down in Ukraine and the Middle East and pivot to China. And so I see it maybe through a little bit different lens than you do. There are always 2 sides to coins, and one side is the U.S. and the U.S.'s de facto declaration of war against China. So there is, and that comes from a variety of sources. But one thing that it comes from is something that in economics that's completely misunderstood, and that is that we have a trade deficit and also a current account deficit in the United States. We've had one every year since 1975, and a lot of people think that trade deficits are bad, and that they're caused by nefarious activities of foreigners. And when I was on President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors in the 80s, if you go back that far, the big problem, the big enemy was who? Japan. Japan was the one that was forcing through nefarious activities, unfair trading practices, all of these things supposedly, the Japanese were causing the trade deficit. Now, of course, the thing has shifted, and although Japan does fill some of that deficit, the big filler is China. And so all fingers are pointed to China from kind of an economic point of view, forgetting the military part of the thing. And this is just incorrect. The reason we have a trade deficit is due to the fact that the U.S., we spend more than we produce. and the gap between what we spend and what we produce is a trade deficit, and it's an identity. It happens to exist because it's a true identity. And who causes it? Americans cause it because they spend more than they produce. Now, what do we have?
Yeah, can I just ask you to clarify that for a second? Is it because we spend more than we produce, or is it because we buy more than we sell? And is it not a fact that China has limitations on what we can sell inside its country from the United States, whereas we don't have those same limitations?
We have the same. We have the same kinds of controls. But
well, we have the potential, but do we exercise it?
Oh, yes, we do.
All right. Well, enlighten us.
There are many things that we restrict trading on with China. For example, just something you read about all the time in the press are chips, high quality chips. That's one restriction. But let's first get to the economics, because people do not understand, and your response to what I said indicates a part of the confusion.
Okay.
Spending is what? Spending is consumption,
sure,
plus investment, plus government spending, plus an X, and the X is the balance in the international account equals GDP. So this is what everybody learns in Principles of Economics 101. Consumption plus investment plus government plus X, which is a foreign account, equals GDP. Now, if you have consumption plus investment plus government that exceeds the value of GDP, X has got to be a negative. That's the identity. And X being the negative, that's the trade deficit. So it's just arithmetic. And the causation is, in fact, by the U.S. Now, another way to think about it, and another identity, is the savings investment identity. And we actually save less than we invest in the United States. This is another way to get at the problem. And that this savings that we have, or deficiency in savings is less than investment. And that means we have to have a trade deficit to fill that gap, whatever the deficiency number happens to be. And if you look at your national income accounts and go through this consumption plus investment plus government plus X equals GDP, you get the numbers, and they're very easy to see what the numbers are. It always balances. It's just accounting.
Well, now, aren't there some economists that do not include government spending in the GDP because the government doesn't produce anything? They just spend money.
They spend though, and it's counted in the national income accounting, and the way GDP, the gross national product, is defined. It is defined exactly the way I've given it to you: consumption plus investment plus government plus X, the foreign account, equals GDP. So that's just
okay.
That's
well,
just
connect the dots. How does
the
that
definition of GDP?
How does that relate to our trade deficit with China? That's where I'm a little lost here. Is President Trump, does he just have it wrong?
He
says that we've got a massive trade deficit with China. We're basically helping to subsidize their economy in doing so.
No, he doesn't understand anything about this. It's completely wrong.
Okay.
Completely wrong. For the reason that I've just given you. Just let me go over here just a second.
Now, we had Bob Lighthizer on our program. He's written a book called No Trade is Free. I think he would probably challenge your paradigms as well.
Well, Lighthizer, of course, doesn't understand anything else about it either. Lighthizer never learned. I was going to get the numbers.
And what about Secretary Ross? I watched him on.
Ross has got it wrong too. Ross doesn't understand it either.
Well, no disrespect, Dr. Hankey, but
these are basic.
Is it they've all got it wrong, or that you just disagree with them?
No, they've all got it wrong. This is an identity. It's a truth. It has to be true. They don't understand it. If you ask any professional economist trained in economics, you would have 99.9% of them agreeing with what I'm just saying.
Well, we just had on
whether they're on the left, on the right, in the center, it doesn't make any difference.
What's the guy's name we just had on? We had on one of your colleagues from the Mises Institute just earlier today, Gary Gillis. He is at Pepperdine, where he teaches economics. And he has a slightly different perspective than what you've articulated. I want to challenge you on one other thing that you indicated. I have to take strong exception to the part that you referenced relative to our restricting China from buying our chips. There's a good reason for that, isn't there? That they reverse engineer and steal our intellectual property, which they've done for the last 20 years.
This wasn't the reason for this is not economics and not logic. It's national security. Anytime you wrap something in the flag, the logic disappears. There's nothing you can argue with. If you say, they're going to drop a bomb on you unless you do this, you agree and say, I don't want the bomb dropped on me. So do you challenge that we restrict their use of our chips because they reverse engineer them? No, you started with a falsity. You made a false statement. Now John, you've got a program that says truth.
Yeah.
So we have to.
I'm trying to get to it right now.
And the truth is that we have restrictions. You asserted we have no restrictions on China, and I said no.
I stand corrected. You pointed out a very good example of where we absolutely restrict trade from China.
Yes,
and I'm saying that is for a very good reason that they're stealing our intellectual property. Do you disagree with that?
For whatever reason, but we started with the premise that you held, and the premise was that we are the angels. We don't do anything wrong. We're clean as a hound's tooth. This is just garbage. And going back again to economics, let's talk about the trade war that we're in. You said we're in a war with China. I agreed. We're in a war with China, and it's basically one aspect. And the aspect that I'm an expert on and can talk about is economics. I'm not in the Department of Defense. Now, you want to get into the Department of Defense. I'm not in the Department of Defense.
Well, I'm trying to look at the whole picture, and I don't know that you can look at an economic war and separate it from what we see with our very own eyes: spy balloons traversing our country, military-age men illegally crossing our southern border, 7 or 8 Chinese police precincts spread throughout the country from New York to Los Angeles. Fentanyl that has cost the lives of tens of thousands of Americans.
What we do in China?
I would like to hear, because I am interested.
No, I mean, things are a little bit more symmetrical than you think. You don't think the U.S. is doing anything in China? We don't have any satellites looking in on China and so forth. So let's talk about the economics just a little bit, because the trade war and Trump's tariffs, or the threat of tariffs, are a real issue. I'm not only an economist, but I'm actually a realist, and we're talking about tariffs. And tariffs supposedly will solve this trade deficit problem, which is a problem. Number one, the trade deficit is not a problem. It's a good deal for the Americans. Americans actually can spend and consume more than they produce. That's a good deal, and it's been easy for us to finance it. Why do you think it has existed since 1975? Because we can finance it. And why can we finance it? We've been able to finance it because the U.S. dollar is the king. It is the only international currency. It's the top of the heap. And it allows us the privilege of being able to finance a big trade deficit without any pain whatsoever. The money comes into the United States. Foreigners want to invest. They want to be holding assets that are denominated in the U.S. dollar. So it makes it very easy for us to finance a deficit. If you were in a developing country or an emerging market country, John, as they say, that you might have a big problem if you're running a trade deficit for a long time, because there might be a sudden stop of capital wanting and being attracted to coming in to your country to finance the deficit that you were running. And if that happens, you have a huge currency crisis. These happen all the time. We don't have a currency crisis. We just keep financing the thing. So trade deficits are not inherently bad, and in fact, they've been very good in the United States. They have been caused by Uncle Sam. They're made in the USA. That Japan and China, the only thing they're doing is filling the deficit, and that deficit would be exactly the same if China didn't exist, John, because the deficit would be filled by somebody else.
Well, that's fine, but I keep coming back to the point that, all right, let me ask you this way. What about the EU? Do you feel like the same logic applies to them? Now, we created intentionally trade deficits with the EU after World War II so we could help rebuild Europe. Those policies don't really seem to have a place in 2025 because the EU's population is slightly larger than the United States and their combined GDP is only slightly less than the United States. So has the purpose for having subsidized the EU, does that still, how does that factor into your analysis? And then the other 170 countries around the world that we're subsidizing.
It's basically what they say a second order condition. The first order condition is how much savings are being done in the United States versus investment, or how much spending is being done relative to GDP. And when we were in the Marshall Plan and so forth, we were running a surplus. It was the other way around. We were spending less than our GDP, and we had, instead of having a negative in that X, we had a positive. So it was another ball game, and we also were actually savings more than we're investing. Now the savings more than we're investing, the way to get a handle on that is that the big dissaver, the thing that contributes to savings in the United States, and the fact that savings is less than investment, is government deficits. If we wanted to balance the trade account, if we thought that was a good thing to do, it would be very easy to solve. You just balance the federal budget, and you would tend to shrink that trade deficit almost immediately, and fundamentally probably would disappear. At least given the recent calculations I've done on this. I have an article in the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance published in 2009, where Ed Lee and I actually, for the first time, go through all the numbers for the savings investment identity. And it turns out that the private savings in the United States are actually greater than private investment. Where you end up with a deficiency that overwhelms that surplus in the private sector is the public sector. The public sector runs deficits. They dissave. And that contributes mightily to the trade deficit that we have. Now, the question that really you're getting into is, well, who's going to fill the deficit? You don't like China, okay? So let's say that you prohibited everything coming from China. You'd still have the trade deficit that would have to be filled by somebody. And it would just be other countries.
Well, I have no bias against China. What I have a bias against is the things that they are doing inside of our country, and we are seemingly asleep at the switch on it. And it's not a notion that I have invented. Again, Peter Schweitzer, Robert Spalding, Gordon Chang, three pretty reliable and respected journalists, authors, have made me aware of these things. So that is my concern. let me ask you about the deficits. I've got this notion that it would be really bad if we just with the stroke of a pen decided to balance our budget in a really short period of time. It's my observation that when our country gets in economic trouble, the first thing we do is we start printing money by the truckloads, and we call it stimulus. Well, isn't the corollary if we stop the deficit spending and suck that money out of the economy, like $2 trillion, would that not be recessionary? And would we not feel ill effects from that if it weren't done with a lot of intention?
No, you wouldn't do that at all. It depends on number one. In general, it would be at this stage. It actually would be a stimulus, because the conventional view and what people learn in principles economics, they learn Keynesian economics, and Keynesian economics tells you what, if you run a deficit, you have a Keynesian multiplier that's attached to that, and it multiplies. It stimulates. If you run a deficit, it stimulates. But that's not really what you find. If you look at the data, again, as a realist, you find that if deficits run over about 3 or 4% per year, which they do now in the United States, they whack confidence, and they make those deficits turn into negative Keynesian fiscal multipliers. So they actually slow down the economy. The deficit we're running now is not stimulating, it's dragging. And you can get that by listening to people like Jamie Dimon, and president of JP Morgan, or many other people in the financial sector who are worried about what? They're worried about the deficit. A lot of people are worried about the deficit. Why are they worried about it? Well, intuitively, they understand what I just told you from a technical point of view. And from a technical point of view right now, the deficit's dragging the economy. And that it's dragging it because instead of a positive Keynesian multiplier of being applied to the deficit, you have a negative. And the reason it's negative is because of confidence, business confidence.
Consumer confidence.
People are afraid. You're running this big deficit.
Well, shouldn't they be afraid when the deficit is $36 trillion and the interest on that?
They should.
Hang on. And the interest on that debt is our second largest line item in the federal budget today.
It's 13%. Of government spending. And it's spending for nothing, basically. What do you get by paying interest? Do you get any service from the government? Do you get any goods from the government? You get nothing from the government.
Well, that's the argument I was making earlier about including
no,
you
GDP. Were making the opposite argument.
No, I've said no. That's not accurate at all. I said that a lot of people do not consider government spending part of the GDP because the government produces nothing.
No, but
now you're agreeing with what I said earlier.
You're jumping onto a different stool here. You started this last chat that we've had by saying, wouldn't it be a bad idea to shrink the deficit down to zero fast?
Now, I'm not advocating that at all. I would like to see us have a balanced budget. I'm just asking you out of intellectual curiosity, if spending money in bad times is a stimulus, why would not be constricting government spending, therefore be the opposite? That would be deflationary. And I just said, wouldn't it be a balancing act that we'd have to engage in?
This is what I told you. We're running a big deficit that's a drag. It's not stimulating. It's dragging the economy.
I'm willing to accept your
And by the way, the only way to solve the thing to my satisfaction would be to cut government spending, and that doesn't seem to be in the cards. Both parties, the Republicans and Democrats, are just as bad when it comes to controlling government spending. They're spending like drunken sailors. Look at this big beautiful bill that they have in there. that bill contains what? It contains
pork.
Increased government spending. A lot of pork. There's no question about that.
And that's why Elon Musk was upset at President Trump. He said that you've obliterated all the work we've done at Doge because you're just spending.
Well, that's why Musk is right. Musk is the richest guy in the world because he can add and subtract. and by the way, that was a big contentious issue with the president, and because the president really doesn't care about spending. But
my interpretation is that he understands the art of the practical, and that in order to codify the 2017 tax cuts and to get the new tax cuts that he wants, he's going to have to placate the people that want to spend until the next budget go around. Now, I could be wrong, but that's how I read the tea leaves.
But my reading of him now, as well as the first term, is that one area he doesn't really care much about is the government budget. There's not much focus on controlling the government.
Well, we have found a source of agreement, because you can't argue with that. The government was expanded under Trump 1.0, and he's shown no determination to curtail it so far 6 months into his current administration. I agree with you. Disappointingly.
So we do have a good point of agreement now. Let's follow up this point of agreement with how can you actually solve the thing to satisfy Gordon and Hankey? And the only way to do that is to have a constitutional convention, Article 5 of the Constitution, and change the U.S. Constitution so that it reads like the Swiss Constitution, which was changed in 2001, in which the Swiss debt brake was put into the Constitution. They had a referendum in Switzerland. They had a huge majority that wanted the debt brake to be put in the Constitution, which they did. Now, what's the debt brake say? It says that the budget must be balanced in Switzerland, point number one. And it says that government spending in Switzerland can't increase any more rapidly than the real growth in the economy. So that means that in Switzerland, the government can't get larger relative to the total size of the economy, than it is right now. It could get smaller, but it can't get bigger. So that's the only solution, I think, John, because these Band-Aids that occasionally we've tried to put on the budget through statutory means to control it. Remember the Graham-Rudman bill. That was a Band-Aid. It was a good Band-Aid. It worked for a while, but they figure out a way in Washington, D.C. to tear the Band-Aids off.
Yeah, we put debt limits in place to curtail spending, and we can just raise the debt limit.
So exactly. So the only way you really can do this thing is a constitutional change.
Well, I know who we could get to lead it. I'd start with Rand Paul and Ron Johnson. I bet you they would sign up for that task.
We to do this, we have to have 2/3 of the states agreeing to have a convention, which in principle they already have. The problem is the Congress has ignored their request for a convention. And why has the Congress ignored their request?
Because California and New York have more votes than most others.
They don't want the Constitution to change, and they don't want a straitjacket to be put on government spending.
Yeah, and if you called a constitutional convention, there's a good likelihood that another amendment would be term limits. Well, that would be my guess is why they don't want a convention.
The convention can be confined to only looking at the budget.
Yes, I agree.
In other words, a lot of people argue, we can't have a convention. It would be a runaway convention, and they would redo everything in the Constitution. No, you can have a very limited scope of debate about what issue it is that you're going to focus on with regard to changing the Constitution.
All right. Now, you've written a new book called Making Money Work, How to Rewrite the Rules of Our Financial System. Tell us about the book, and sounds like you have some rewriting to do.
So well, I don't have any rewriting to do in the book. It just
No, not in
came
the
out.
book. I'm saying just for our economy.
Yeah, well, there is quite a bit. But let me make the kind of 3 points that that we make in the book that I co-authored with Matt Sikorski. One is to bring back the quantity theory of money as the model for national income determination. Now, what that means is that the national income determination, the nominal GDP, which includes a real component, real growth, and inflation, if you add those two things together, you get nominal GDP. And to determine nominal GDP, you have to look at changes that have occurred in the money supply prior to today's date when you're looking at the nominal GDP. In short, if you want to forecast where nominal GDP is going, where inflation's going, where real growth is going, you have to know what's happened to changes in the money supply prior to the date that you're forecasting or the date that you're looking at the nominal GDP. So that's one thing. The second thing, and this is a big deal because the Federal Reserve dismisses the quantity theory of money. Chairman Powell says, and he's testified over and over again, that changes in the money supply have no reliable relationship to the economy and to economic activity. That's just not true. But that's the Fed's position. And of course, without the quantity theory of money, what have they given us? A roller coaster ride in the money supply, up, and then we get inflation, and then down, and we get inflation starting to come down. So that's the first overriding point of the book. The second point is that since the great financial crisis in 2008, commercial banks have been kind of squeezed out of the system. We had Dodd-Frank legislation. We had new capital regulations coming from Basel, Switzerland. Those have all been imposed on banks, and banks have been kind of squeezed out of the system. This has been bad because banks produce most of the money in the economy. About 80% of the money supply, measured broadly by M2 or some broader measure, is actually produced privately by commercial banks, not the central bank. So we want to change the rules so that some of these regulations are lifted off or modified as they affect commercial banks and commercial bank activity. That's the second point. The third point is the objective of monetary policy should focus on what we call neutrality. If you put money in the system, it's not neutral. And to give an example of how this works, in the United States, before the pandemic, in January 2020, billionaires' wealth as a percent of GDP was about 14.1% of GDP. Now, at the start of this year, it was 21.1% of GDP. Billionaires' wealth as a percent of GDP. So money is not neutral. What happened? Why isn't it neutral? If you have the money supply being goosed, asset prices go up. That's the first thing that happens. So land prices go up, real estate prices go up, the stock market booms. And who owns the assets? Well, rich people own the assets. Poor people have balance sheets that are negative, actually. They don't have any net assets. Sure. They have negative. Well, so what has happened, this last thing, through the pandemic, the Fed goosed the money supply, and they also created huge wealth and income inequality in the United States, which is bad.
I agree. Don't you think this trend towards consolidation has contributed to that immensely? I mean, the media in this country is controlled by basically 6 or 7 corporations. The pharmaceutical industry has gotten so consolidated that, and you talk about banking. My dad was a community banker. You can't find a community bank anymore. They've all been bought up.
Yeah, the community banks are going by the wayside.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And not in a good way. So
well, in a bad way, because who actually, just think about it in a realistic, practical way. The key thing in a bank is to be able to assess credit risk and credit quality.
Yeah.
Well, who can do that better than a good old boy running a community bank?
Who knows people?
I mean, you know very well, a community banker knows what? He knows everything that's going on from the bedroom to the downtown Main Street. And you have to know all those things if you're going to be able to assess credit properly and credit risk properly and make a loan. And what happens when you make a loan? You make a loan to John Gordon to do something. And you know what the credit risks are associated with Gordon. And what does Gordon have to do to get the loan? You've got to put some assets that you have up against that as collateral. So what happens with the creation of the loan creates money, because that loan does what? It goes into Gordon's credit checking account, and checking accounts are part of the money supply. In fact, the biggest chunk of the money supply are liquid deposits at commercial banks, including obviously community banks or commercial banks. Sure. They're just small ones.
Yeah. So Jerome Powell, good for our nation or bad for our nation? I mean, could you make the argument that he's done a pretty skillful job of taming inflation while not sending us into a recession? Would you?
No, I would say he's been one of the worst chairmen we've had. He's had us on a roller coaster. He created a huge inflation boom because he ignored the quantity theory of money. And then he had to put everything in reverse. And the money supply actually is about the same today as it was in April of 2022, which means that we'll end up going into a recession later this year because we haven't had any money growth.
That's not a very optimistic outlook. I'm sorry to hear you say that. What do you think about Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary? Maybe he should be the next chairman of the Fed.
Well, Bessent is getting passing grades from the market, but he's basically a cheerleader for the president. So he's echoing whatever the president says, and the big thing that's disrupting the international economy is trade, and Bessent is saying the same stupidities that Trump is. And he said last week the next thing to sliced bread is going to be stable coins. Now that's just promoting Trumpism and putting a lot of money in Trump's family's pockets. So that's a crony capitalism kind of thing.
Well, maybe he likes job security. I don't know.
Well, I think that the courtiers around kings always like job security.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that goes with the territory. I mean, the president installed him in that position, and I think that he should have a reasonable expectation for loyalty. But I'm sure they mix it up behind closed doors and can have frank conversations.
We don't know.
Well, we know that he mixed it up with Elon Musk pretty good, and we saw how that turned out.
Yeah, we did, and I think Musk was on the right side of the argument.
I 100% agree with you, Dr. Steve Hanke. Just a really interesting and fun interview, Dr. Hanke. Usually they're a lot less contentious, but that's all right. I mean, I think contention is a good way to get to the truth.
Well,
I have an open mind. I want to receive the information that you've delivered today, and I'm going to think about it. And I'm particularly going to check your definition of the GDP, because I went to the penultimate source of knowledge on the internet, and nowhere do they tie government spending with GDP. But you've sent me on a mission. I'm going to go dig deeper.
As we wind up, go to any principles of economics. You really have to be careful with the internet. As I always tell my students, You know, my 95% rule holds. Hankey's 95% is 95% of what you read on the internet is either wrong or irrelevant.
Good note to end on, Dr. Steve Hankey. And I hope you will come back.
I say I'm all for getting at the truth, and I've enjoyed immensely having a chat with you today. It's been, shall we say, stimulating.
Well, that's the whole point, and hopefully for our listeners, entertaining as we come to you every Saturday on the John Fredericks Media Network in 7 cities on 22 AM and FM stations, on the CDM Media Press on their 13 digital platforms, and all across the World Wide Web on YouTube, X, Getter, Rumble, Facebook, and others. Dr. Hankey, thanks a lot. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, John. All the best.